Future faking. Future faking is a manipulation tactic where someone makes grand promises about the future to keep you emotionally invested in the present. It's a lie disguised as hope, a calculated way to get you to stay, comply, or give more, without the manipulator ever intending to follow through. At first, it feels intoxicating. The person paints a picture of a perfect future. We're going to get married one day. Next year, we'll move in together. You'll get that promotion soon. These statements are designed to make you believe in a shared vision, to keep you motivated and loyal. But the key detail in future faking is that the promised future never comes. A manipulator who uses future faking does not have real intentions of delivering on their words. They dangle the idea of a better tomorrow just long enough to get what they want today. The person in the relationship holds on, thinking maybe they just need more time. The employee keeps working harder, believing maybe next quarter they'll finally give me the raise. But that day never arrives, and each time you ask about it, there's another excuse. In relationships, future faking is often used to keep someone emotionally attached. A partner might say, "I want to have kids with you someday," or "I just need to figure things out before we move in together." These statements create a sense of security, making the victim more patient and forgiving. Even when red flags appear, they cling to the dream of what was promised. Future faking is also common in the workplace. A boss may keep an employee in line by promising a promotion, saying, "If you just stay a little longer and prove yourself, I'll make sure you get the raise." Months or even years pass, and the goalpost keeps moving. The employee remains stuck, afraid to leave because they believe they're on the verge of a breakthrough. In friendships and social circles, future faking can be used to maintain leverage. A friend might say, "I'll pay you back soon," or "We'll start that business together one day." The victim invests time, money, or energy into an illusion, only to realize that the promised future was never real. The reason future faking works so well is because humans are naturally hopeful. We want to believe in the good, in possibilities, in the words of people we trust. Manipulators know this and exploit it, using hope as a leash to keep their target from walking away. The biggest sign of future faking is inconsistency. The words are big, but the actions never match. A manipulator will always have an excuse for why things didn't happen yet, but they will never take real steps to make their promises a reality. The only way to escape future faking is to judge people by their actions, not their words. If a promise is repeated but never fulfilled, stop believing it. Set a mental deadline. If nothing changes by a certain point, walk away. Manipulators thrive on the fact that their victims keep waiting, keep hoping. The moment you stop waiting for empty promises and start making decisions based on reality, their power over you disappears. Hope is a beautiful thing when it's real, but when it's used as a tool for control, it becomes a trap. A future that is always just out of reach is no future at all. Recognizing this is the key to breaking free. Stonewalling. Stonewalling is a silent weapon used to shut down communication and control a situation. Unlike the silent treatment, which is used as emotional punishment, stonewalling is about avoidance and refusal to engage. The person doing it refuses to answer questions, dodges accountability, or simply acts as if the conversation doesn't exist. It's a way to derail conflicts, deflect responsibility, and make the other person feel unheard and powerless. It usually starts with an argument or a difficult conversation. One person expresses frustration or tries to address a problem, but instead of engaging in dialogue, the stonewaller refuses to respond. They might say things like, "I don't want to talk about this," or "I'm done with this conversation." But rather than using temporary space to cool off, they shut the conversation down completely, sometimes for hours, days, or even weeks. This creates an emotional deadlock. The person trying to communicate feels helpless, as if they're talking to a wall. The more they try to engage, the more resistance they face. The stonewaller might roll their eyes, cross their arms, or stare blankly. They might leave the room or start scrolling through their phone, ignoring the conversation entirely. This lack of response sends a clear message. Your feelings don't matter enough for me to acknowledge. Stonewalling is especially damaging because it denies the victim any form of resolution. It leaves them feeling frustrated, invalidated, and often desperate to fix things. This desperation plays right into the stonewaller's hands, shifting the power dynamic in their favor. The victim starts second-guessing themselves, wondering if they are overreacting or being too pushy. They may begin apologizing for simply wanting to talk, reinforcing the stonewaller's control. In relationships, stonewalling can be a form of passive-aggressive domination. A partner might consistently refuse to discuss important issues, making their significant other feel isolated and unheard. Over time, the victim stops bringing up concerns altogether, fearing the inevitable wall of silence. In workplaces, stonewalling is used to avoid accountability. A boss or coworker might ignore emails, refuse to address mistakes, or pretend they don't hear complaints. This makes it impossible to resolve issues, forcing others to either give up or accept unfair treatment. In families, stonewalling can be a tool for manipulation. A parent may refuse to speak to their child after a disagreement, making the child feel abandoned and anxious. A sibling might ignore messages to avoid responsibility for their actions. In each case, stonewalling creates an emotional power struggle where the victim is left grasping for any form of acknowledgement. The psychological effects of stonewalling can be severe. It can cause anxiety, self-doubt, and emotional exhaustion. Victims often internalize feelings of rejection, believing they are unworthy of attention or resolution. In long-term relationships, persistent stonewalling can lead to emotional detachment, where the victim no longer bothers trying to communicate, leading to deep resentment and emotional decay. The only way to combat stonewalling is to recognize it for what it is: emotional manipulation. The more someone chases a stonewaller for a response, the more power the stonewaller gains. Instead of begging for engagement, victims must set boundaries. If someone refuses to communicate, the best response is to stop engaging and focus on one's own emotional well-being. If a relationship is built on constant stonewalling, it may be time to reconsider if it's a healthy space to remain in. Communication is the foundation of any healthy relationship. When one person builds a wall instead of a bridge, they are not just avoiding a conversation, they are denying the other person their basic right to be heard. Gaslighting. Gaslighting is one of the most insidious forms of psychological manipulation. It isn't just about lying or twisting facts. It's about systematically dismantling someone's ability to trust their own mind. A gaslighter distorts reality so skillfully that their victim begins to doubt their own memory, perception, and even sanity. It starts subtly. A comment like, "That never happened," or "You're overreacting," may seem harmless at first, but over time, these small denials accumulate. The victim begins to second-guess their experiences, unsure of what they saw, heard, or felt. Eventually, they defer to the manipulator's version of events, believing that their own recollection must be flawed. Gaslighters thrive on control. Their goal is to destabilize their target, making them question their own judgment so that they rely entirely on the gaslighter's narrative. The more confused and disoriented the victim becomes, the easier they are to manipulate. A gaslighter doesn't need to tell an outright lie to achieve this. Sometimes, all it takes is consistent denial or trivialization of the victim's concerns. When confronted with a problem, they might simply say, "You're too sensitive," or "You're making a big deal out of nothing." These phrases work by dismissing the victim's emotions, making them feel irrational for even bringing it up. Another common tactic is shifting the blame. If the victim accuses the gaslighter of wrongdoing, the response is often a deflection. "You're the one who's always causing problems," or "You're acting crazy." Instead of addressing the issue, they turn the tables and make the victim feel like the problem. This tactic is powerful because it puts the victim on the defensive, forcing them to prove their own sanity rather than holding the gaslighter accountable. Gaslighting also involves rewriting history. A gaslighter will confidently claim that events happen differently from how the victim remembers them, forcing them to doubt their own memory. They might insist, "I never said that," or "That's not how it happened at all." Even when presented with evidence, they refuse to acknowledge the truth. This constant reality distortion wears down the victim's ability to trust their own recollections. The long-term effects of gaslighting are devastating. Victims often experience anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, and a complete loss of self-trust. They become so accustomed to questioning their own reality that they feel paralyzed in decision-making, afraid that their perceptions are unreliable. Over time, they begin apologizing for things they didn't do, altering their behavior to avoid conflict, and seeking the gaslighter's approval just to feel a sense of normalcy. The only way to combat gaslighting is to trust in one's own reality. Keeping a record of events, such as journaling important conversations, can help establish a clear reference point when the gaslighter tries to twist the facts. Seeking validation from trusted friends and family members can also serve as a reality check. If multiple people confirm that an event happened as remembered, it reinforces the victim's trust in their own memory. Engaging with a gaslighter in endless arguments to prove what is true is a losing battle. They are not interested in the truth, only in control. The best response is to set firm boundaries, limit engagement, and, if possible, walk away entirely. Gaslighting is dangerous because it erodes a person's sense of self, but once recognized for what it is, its power weakens. A person who trusts their own mind and refuses to be drawn into the manipulator's web is beyond their control. Love bombing. Love bombing is manipulation disguised as romance. At first, it feels intoxicating, like the perfect relationship, like something out of a movie. The love bomber overwhelms their target with extravagant gestures, constant affection, and flattering words. They say all the right things, shower their partner with attention, and create an illusion of deep, intense connection. But underneath the surface, it isn't about love at all. It's about control. The relationship moves at an unnatural speed. Love bombers push for commitment early, saying things like, "I've never felt this way before," or "You're my soulmate." They make their target feel special, irreplaceable, like the center of their world. The affection is relentless. Text messages all day, surprise gifts, declarations of love within weeks. To the unsuspecting person, it feels magical, but it's a setup. Once the love bomber senses that their target is emotionally invested, they start pulling away. The texts slow down, the compliments stop, the affectionate gestures disappear. The person who once seemed devoted suddenly becomes cold and distant. The shift is subtle at first, but it leaves the victim confused and craving the attention they once received. This is where the real manipulation begins. The victim starts wondering if they did something wrong, desperately trying to get back to the honeymoon phase of the relationship. They might try harder to please the love bomber, walking on eggshells in an effort to regain their affection. This is exactly what the manipulator wants, an emotionally dependent partner who will do anything to win back their approval. The reason love bombing is so effective is because it creates an emotional addiction. The intense highs of early affection create a powerful bond, and when that affection is withdrawn, the victim experiences emotional withdrawal. Instead of seeing the relationship as toxic, they hold on to the memory of how good it used to be. believing that if they just try hard enough, they can bring back that version of their partner. Love bombing is not about love, it's about creating dependency. The manipulator conditions their target to accept mistreatment in exchange for occasional bursts of affection. The cycle keeps repeating. Moments of coldness are followed by brief returns to warmth, reinforcing the emotional addiction. The victim never knows what version of their partner they'll get, and this unpredictability keeps them trapped. The only way to escape love bombing is to recognize the pattern before getting pulled in too deep. Real love builds gradually, not in an overwhelming flood. Any relationship that moves too fast, where deep commitments are expected early on, should be approached with caution. A healthy partner respects boundaries and doesn't react with guilt or anger when the pace is slowed down. Consistency is another key indicator. If someone's affection dramatically fluctuates between extreme adoration and cold detachment, it's a sign of emotional manipulation, not genuine love. Seeking input from trusted friends and family can also help break the spell. Those outside the relationship can often see red flags more clearly than the person caught in the emotional whirlwind. Love bombers rely on their targets feeling isolated and dependent, so staying grounded in outside perspectives can be a lifeline. Love bombing is dangerous because it conditions people to accept mistreatment in exchange for temporary affection. But once the illusion is broken, its power fades. Love should be steady, secure, and real, not a manipulation game designed to keep someone trapped in emotional chaos. Guilt tripping. Guilt tripping is one of the most effective manipulation tactics because it exploits a person's natural sense of empathy and responsibility. It's a psychological trap where the manipulator makes someone feel guilty for something they shouldn't feel guilty about. By making the victim feel selfish, ungrateful, or neglectful, the guilt tripper ensures they get what they want without directly asking for it. It starts subtly. A simple sigh, a disappointed look, or a passive-aggressive comment like, "I guess I'll just do it myself," can be enough to trigger feelings of guilt in the target. The manipulator never explicitly states their demand. Instead, they let their victim come to the conclusion themselves, that they need to make it up to the guilt tripper. Over time, this conditioning makes the victim feel like they're constantly failing the manipulator, even when they've done nothing wrong. A guilt tripper will often use past favors as leverage. If they once helped their victim in some way, they will continuously remind them of it, making the victim feel obligated to repay the debt, whether it's reasonable or not. They might say things like, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me," or "I can't believe you'd say no after all the sacrifices I've made." These statements are designed to make the victim feel selfish, even if their refusal is completely justified. Another common guilt-tripping tactic is playing the victim. The manipulator exaggerates their suffering, making it seem as if their life is harder than anyone else's. They highlight their struggles while downplaying the struggles of others, reinforcing the idea that their pain is more important. They might say, "You have no idea how much I go through, and now you're making it worse." The victim, not wanting to appear insensitive, feels pressured to give in. Guilt tripping can also appear in family dynamics. A parent might say, "If you really loved me, you would call me more often." A partner might say, "If you cared about this relationship, you wouldn't act this way." These statements create a false equivalence between love and obedience, making the victim feel as if asserting their own needs means betraying the person they care about. Over time, repeated guilt tripping can cause severe emotional distress. The victim starts prioritizing the manipulator's happiness over their own well-being. Afraid of being labeled as ungrateful, selfish, or unloving, they become accustomed to suppressing their own needs just to avoid the crushing weight of guilt. Breaking free from guilt tripping requires recognizing the pattern and understanding that guilt is being used as a weapon. Just because someone makes you feel guilty does not mean you have done something wrong. It is essential to set boundaries and not let emotional manipulation dictate decisions. Responses like, "I understand you're upset, but I'm not responsible for your emotions," or "I appreciate what you've done for me, but that doesn't mean I owe you everything," can help disarm the guilt tripper. Ultimately, guilt tripping works by taking advantage of a person's kindness. The best defense is self-awareness, knowing when guilt is legitimate and when it is being used as a tool for control. Genuine relationships are built on open communication and respect, not on manipulating others into compliance through guilt. Triangulation. Triangulation is a deeply manipulative tactic that involves bringing a third person into a conflict to create insecurity, jealousy, or division. The manipulator uses this third party, either real or imagined, to gain control over the victim, keep them off balance, and maintain dominance in a relationship. This tactic is particularly common in toxic romantic relationships, dysfunctional family dynamics, and toxic workplace environments. A triangulator thrives on comparison. They might say something like, "Unlike you, Sarah really understands me," or "John never gave me this much trouble." The purpose of these statements is to make the victim feel inadequate and compete for the manipulator's approval. By creating the illusion that someone else is doing a better job, the victim starts trying harder to please the manipulator, often at the expense of their own self-respect. In romantic relationships, triangulation is often used to create jealousy and insecurity. A manipulative partner might constantly bring up an ex, a coworker, or even a stranger, making their partner feel like they are in constant competition. They might say, "I wish you were more like them," or "So many people want me. You should appreciate me more." These statements are meant to make the victim feel threatened and desperate for validation, ensuring they stay emotionally dependent on the manipulator. Family members can also use triangulation to create division. A parent might tell one child, "Your sibling never gave me this kind of trouble," while telling the sibling the exact opposite. This creates resentment and rivalry between the children, preventing them from forming a strong bond. The parent remains in control by ensuring that neither child fully trusts the other, keeping their attention focused on winning the parent's approval instead of questioning the manipulative behavior. In workplaces, triangulation is used to create distrust among employees. A toxic boss might tell one employee, "I don't think John is as loyal as you," while telling John, "Sarah doesn't work as hard as you do." By playing both sides against each other, the boss keeps employees from uniting against them and ensures that everyone is too busy competing to challenge their authority. One of the most toxic aspects of triangulation is that it creates invisible enemies. Sometimes the third party doesn't even exist. The manipulator fabricates stories about what others have said or done to control the victim. They might say, "Everyone thinks you're being difficult," or "People have told me they're worried about your behavior." This tactic isolates the victim, making them feel like they have no allies and must depend on the manipulator for validation and reassurance. The long-term effects of triangulation are emotionally devastating. Victims often develop low self-esteem, anxiety, and trust issues as they are constantly forced to compete for approval or defend themselves against false accusations. They begin to doubt their own worth and may struggle to form healthy relationships because they've been conditioned to see others as threats rather than allies. Escaping triangulation requires recognizing that the manipulator is the real problem, not the third party they introduce. The moment someone tries to pit you against another person, step back and ask, "Why are they telling me this? And what do they gain from making me feel this way?" In most cases, the answer is control. Refusing to engage in the competition is the strongest defense. When a triangulator tries to stir jealousy or conflict, respond with indifference. If a partner says, "So many people want me." Instead of reacting with insecurity, reply with, "Then go be with them." If a boss tries to create division, communicate directly with coworkers instead of relying on secondhand information. The key is to remove the manipulator's power by not playing their game. Triangulation thrives on secrecy and confusion. The more people communicate openly and refuse to be manipulated into unnecessary conflict, the weaker the tactic becomes. The best way to win against triangulation is to see through the illusion, refuse to compete, and recognize that the manipulator is the true problem, not the third party they use as a tool. Silent treatment. The silent treatment is a form of psychological punishment disguised as withdrawal. It's not just ignoring someone, it's deliberately shutting them out to manipulate their emotions, instill self-doubt, and exert control over them. The person using the silent treatment withholds communication, affection, and acknowledgement, leaving their target in a state of emotional limbo, unsure of what they did wrong or how to fix it. It begins subtly. A conversation ends in disagreement, and instead of talking through the issue, the manipulator goes silent. They stop responding to messages, refuse to make eye contact, and act as if the other person doesn't exist. Days pass, and the silence becomes unbearable. The victim starts questioning themselves. Did I overreact? Was I being unreasonable? Should I just apologize to make things normal again? This internal guilt is exactly what the silent treatment is designed to create. The goal of the silent treatment is not just avoidance, it's about establishing dominance. By ignoring the other person, the manipulator sends a clear message. Your feelings don't matter. I control when this relationship is okay again. They know that their silence will force the victim into submission, making them more willing to comply just to regain a sense of normalcy. Unlike a healthy break for cooling off after an argument, the silent treatment is prolonged and intentional. The manipulator wants their target to suffer, to feel small and unimportant. They enjoy watching the person squirm, beg for attention, and ultimately concede, even if they weren't in the wrong. Over time, this kind of emotional starvation conditions the victim to become more submissive. They start walking on eggshells, trying to avoid doing anything that might trigger another round of silence. In relationships, the silent treatment can make a partner feel invisible and powerless. Instead of resolving conflicts, the manipulator withdraws affection, making the victim feel like they are chasing a ghost. The longer the silence lasts, the more desperate the victim becomes. Eventually, they may start apologizing just to end the torture, even if they don't know what they did wrong. In friendships and workplaces, the silent treatment isolates and disempowers. A manipulative boss may ignore an employee to make them feel unworthy, forcing them to work harder for approval. A toxic friend may suddenly stop responding, creating a sense of rejection that leaves the victim anxious and seeking reconciliation. The emotional effects of prolonged silent treatment can be severe. Victims experience anxiety, self-doubt, and an overwhelming need to fix things, even when they aren't the ones who broke them. Over time, this damages their self-esteem, making them feel unworthy of attention or respect. The only way to fight back is to recognize the silent treatment for what it is, manipulation. Instead of chasing the manipulator for answers, victims must shift their mindset. If someone is using silence as a weapon, the best response is indifference. Refusing to react to the silence takes away the manipulator's power. Seeking validation from others and setting firm boundaries can also prevent future emotional blackmail. Silence is supposed to be peaceful, not punishing. Healthy people communicate when they're upset. Those who weaponize silence do so to control, not to heal. Once you understand this, their power over you disappears. Shifting the blame. Shifting the blame is one of the most common and effective manipulation tactics. Instead of taking responsibility for their actions, the manipulator redirects fault onto someone else. making the victim feel guilty, defensive, or even responsible for the manipulator's mistakes. This tactic keeps the manipulator in control while forcing the victim to justify themselves instead of holding the manipulator accountable. It starts with an accusation. Maybe the manipulator does something hurtful, breaks a promise, or fails to meet an obligation. When confronted, they don't apologize or take responsibility. Instead, they immediately turn the conversation around. They might say, "Well, if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have reacted this way." Suddenly, the focus is no longer on their behavior. It's on the victim's supposed wrongdoing. This creates confusion and self-doubt. The victim starts questioning themselves, wondering if they really were at fault. They replay the situation in their head, trying to figure out if they did something to cause the problem. Meanwhile, the manipulator walks away free of guilt, having successfully redirected the blame. A common method of blame shifting is making the victim feel irrational. If the victim is upset, the manipulator might say, "You're overreacting," or "You're being dramatic." Instead of addressing the issue, they make the victim feel like they are the problem. Another powerful tactic is playing the victim. If the manipulator is caught lying, they might say, "You're always accusing me. Why don't you trust me?" Suddenly, the conversation shifts from their dishonesty to the victim's paranoia. The victim feels guilty for doubting them, even if they had every reason to. Blame shifting is especially damaging in relationships. A cheating partner might say, "If you gave me more attention, I wouldn't have done this." Instead of taking responsibility for their betrayal, they make their partner feel like the cause of it. This tactic is designed to break the victim's confidence, making them feel responsible for things that were never their fault. In families, blame shifting can create lifelong guilt. A toxic parent might say, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me?" making the child feel ungrateful instead of recognizing the parent's manipulative behavior. A sibling might avoid consequences by saying, "Mom and Dad always favor you anyway," making the responsible sibling feel guilty for holding them accountable. In the workplace, blame shifting is a survival mechanism for toxic coworkers and bosses. A supervisor who misses a deadline might say, "If my team worked harder, this wouldn't have happened." A coworker who makes a mistake might say, "You should have reminded me." Instead of owning their failures, they push the burden onto others, keeping themselves in the clear while others scramble to defend themselves. The reason blame shifting is so effective is because it preys on the victim's sense of fairness. Most people don't want to be seen as unreasonable, overly sensitive, or accusatory. The manipulator uses this to their advantage, knowing that if they twist the situation just enough, the victim will back down or even take on the blame themselves. The best way to counter blame shifting is to stay focused on the original issue. If a manipulator tries to redirect the conversation, bring it back. "We're not talking about me right now. We're talking about what you did." Refuse to be pulled into defending yourself when the real issue is their actions. Recognizing this tactic is crucial because the moment you stop accepting misplaced guilt, the manipulator loses their power. They rely on their victim's willingness to take responsibility for things they shouldn't. But once the victim stops playing the game, the blame no longer sticks. Blame shifting is not just about avoiding responsibility, it's about keeping control. The moment you refuse to accept responsibility for someone else's actions is the moment they lose their grip on you. Accountability should never be a one-sided burden. Playing the victim. Playing the victim is a psychological manipulation tactic where the manipulator twists reality to make themselves appear as the helpless or innocent party, even when they are the ones causing harm. This tactic is used to deflect blame, evade responsibility, and gain sympathy from others. The goal is simple: to make others feel sorry for them so they can avoid consequences, control situations, or guilt people into compliance. It often begins when the manipulator is confronted about their actions. Instead of addressing the issue, they immediately shift the focus to their own supposed suffering. They might say things like, "You're always attacking me," "I can't believe you're treating me this way," or "I guess I'm just the bad guy." By framing themselves as the victim, they divert attention away from their behavior and onto how unfairly they are being treated. This tactic works because most people don't want to feel like they are being cruel or unreasonable. The moment someone starts crying, acting hurt, or claiming they are misunderstood, the dynamic shifts. The person confronting them begins second-guessing themselves, wondering if they were too harsh or if they should apologize. This self-doubt is exactly what the manipulator wants. Instead of holding them accountable, the victim now becomes the one trying to comfort them. One of the most toxic aspects of playing the victim is exaggeration and distortion. The manipulator may twist events to make themselves look completely innocent. If they were rude or aggressive, they might later claim they were just defending themselves from your unfair criticism. If they neglected their responsibilities, they might suddenly talk about how overwhelmed and stressed they are, making you feel guilty for even bringing it up. This tactic is commonly used in relationships. A partner who is emotionally abusive may say, "I only get angry because you don't love me enough." Instead of addressing their own behavior, they make their partner feel responsible for their emotions. This keeps the victim stuck in a cycle of trying to fix things that were never their fault. In family dynamics, toxic parents may use victimhood to control their children. A parent who is confronted for their neglect may say, "I did everything for you, and this is how you repay me?" Instead of acknowledging their shortcomings, they make their child feel guilty for even questioning them. At work, a manipulative coworker might avoid blame by saying, "I've been under so much pressure. I can't believe you're being so harsh with me." By shifting focus onto their struggles, they make the other person feel like the villain, even when they were just holding them accountable. The long-term effects of dealing with a perpetual victim can be exhausting. Over time, the real victim, the person being manipulated, starts suppressing their own feelings to avoid being labeled as the bad guy. They stop calling out bad behavior, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering another round of emotional manipulation. The best way to counteract this tactic is to stay focused on facts. Do not get drawn into emotional arguments or allow guilt to distort reality. If someone repeatedly shifts blame onto their suffering, ask yourself, are they taking any responsibility, or are they always the victim? If they never acknowledge their own wrongdoing, chances are they are using victimhood as a manipulation tool. Real victims seek solutions. Manipulators seek control. Understanding the difference is the first step to breaking free from their influence. Needing closure. The idea of closure is often romanticized as a necessary step for moving on after a difficult relationship or conflict. But when used as a manipulation tactic, the demand for closure becomes a way to maintain control, drag out emotional pain, and keep the victim entangled in a toxic cycle. Manipulators use the idea of closure as an excuse to stay in someone's life when they should be letting go. Instead of accepting the end of a relationship or disagreement, they insist on one last conversation, not because they genuinely want peace, but because they want to reopen old wounds, stir up emotions, and keep the victim from moving forward. At first, it sounds reasonable. The manipulator might say, "I just need to understand why you're doing this," or "We need to talk so I can get closure." The victim, wanting to be fair and kind, agrees to meet or talk. But instead of a mature conversation, the manipulator uses the opportunity to reignite arguments, guilt trip, or emotionally exhaust the other person. In romantic relationships, a toxic ex may insist on meeting for closure, only to blame the other person for the breakup. demand explanations, or plead for another chance. The conversation rarely brings real closure. Instead, it reopens old pain, making it harder for the victim to move on. They might leave feeling more confused, guilty, or emotionally drained than before. Sometimes, the manipulator doesn't even want to reconcile. They just don't want their victim to heal. By demanding closure, they insert themselves back into the victim's thoughts, ensuring that they remain emotionally unsettled. Even if they have no intention of changing or making things right, they still want the ability to pull the victim back in when it suits them. In family dynamics, toxic relatives may demand closure to keep a victim emotionally tethered. If someone distances themselves from a toxic family member, that person might say, "I deserve closure after everything I've done for you." The victim, feeling guilty, may give them another chance, only to face the same toxic behavior all over again. At work, closure can be used as an excuse for unnecessary conflict. A manipulative coworker or boss might insist on having one last conversation after a disagreement, only to reassert dominance, undermine confidence, or shift blame. The key to recognizing toxic closure is to ask, is this conversation truly necessary, or is it just prolonging emotional turmoil? If someone genuinely wants peace, they will seek closure in a way that is calm, respectful, and focused on mutual understanding. But if they demand closure as a way to keep pulling you back into the cycle, then their intentions are not about resolution. They're about control. True closure does not require permission or participation from the manipulator. It comes from within. It is the moment when you decide to stop engaging in emotional games and choose your own peace over their endless demands. The best way to handle someone weaponizing closure is to refuse to give them another opportunity to manipulate your emotions. Closure is not something you owe to someone who has already shown they don't respect you. If someone truly cared about closure, they would have respected you when it mattered, not just when it was convenient for them to keep you within their reach. The most powerful thing you can do is walk away, knowing that real closure is found in moving forward, not looking back. Projection. Projection is a psychological manipulation tactic where someone accuses another person of the very flaws, mistakes, or negative behaviors they are guilty of themselves. Instead of accepting responsibility for their actions, the manipulator shifts the blame onto their victim, making them feel as though they are the problem. This tactic is designed to confuse, disorient, and make the victim doubt themselves while allowing the manipulator to avoid accountability. It usually happens when the manipulator feels threatened. Instead of admitting their own faults, they turn the tables. If they lie often, they accuse others of being dishonest. If they are controlling, they claim you are the one trying to manipulate them. If they cheat in a relationship, they constantly question your loyalty. The irony is that the accusations often reveal exactly what the manipulator is hiding. Projection works by forcing the victim onto the defensive. Instead of holding the manipulator accountable, the victim now feels the need to prove they are not guilty of what they've been accused of. This shifts the focus away from the manipulator's behavior and onto the victim's emotional reaction. The victim might start questioning themselves, thinking, "Am I actually the one who's wrong here?" This self-doubt keeps them distracted while the manipulator continues their behavior unchecked. In relationships, projection is commonly used to maintain control. A toxic partner who is emotionally abusive may accuse their partner of being too sensitive or too dramatic, even when the victim is simply reacting to mistreatment. The abuser avoids accountability by convincing their partner that they are the problem. In friendships, a manipulative person may say things like, "You're always so negative," when they are the ones who constantly criticize and complain. By projecting their negativity onto someone else, they avoid taking responsibility for their own toxic energy. In workplaces, projection is often used to cover incompetence. A lazy coworker who misses deadlines might accuse others of not pulling their weight. A boss who micromanages may claim an employee lacks initiative, even though the boss is the one stifling their independence. One of the most extreme forms of projection is when an abuser claims to be the victim. A narcissist who has belittled their partner for years might say, "You're emotionally abusive. Look at how you're treating me." This tactic is designed to not only shift blame, but also to manipulate outsiders into seeing the victim as the aggressor. The best way to counter projection is to stay grounded in reality. Instead of immediately defending yourself, step back and ask, is this accusation actually true, or is it a reflection of their own behavior? Keeping a record of interactions can also help you see patterns. If someone consistently accuses you of things that don't align with your character but match their own actions, you are likely dealing with projection. The power of projection lies in its ability to create confusion and self-doubt. The moment you recognize it for what it is, its effect weakens. You no longer need to prove yourself to someone who is simply using accusations as a tool to avoid facing their own flaws. Instead of defending against their false claims, focus on holding them accountable for their actual behavior. Feigning helplessness. Feigning helplessness is a covert manipulation tactic where someone pretends to be incapable, overwhelmed, or in need of constant assistance to get others to do things for them. It's not genuine vulnerability or real need. It's a calculated strategy to avoid responsibility, gain sympathy, and exert control over those who feel obligated to help. This tactic is often used in relationships, workplaces, and even family dynamics. The manipulator acts as if they just can't do it on their own, forcing others to pick up the slack. They might say, "I don't know how to do this. I'm just so bad at this kind of thing," or, "Can you handle it? I'd probably mess it up." The goal is not to learn or improve, but to make someone else step in and take over. In relationships, feigning helplessness is often used to avoid responsibility. A manipulative partner might act as though they are incapable of handling basic tasks, forcing their significant other to do all the work. They may conveniently forget to pay bills, struggle with basic chores, or claim they don't know how to make decisions. Over time, their partner takes on an increasing burden, while the manipulator enjoys a life free from effort. In families, this tactic is frequently seen in toxic parent-child relationships. A parent may say things like, "I just can't handle life without you," or "I don't know what I'd do if you weren't here to take care of me." This makes the child feel responsible for their parent's well-being, trapping them in an unhealthy caretaker role. The parent, instead of acting as a responsible adult, relies on their child for emotional and even financial support, keeping them tethered through guilt and obligation. In workplaces, feigning helplessness is a tool used by lazy or manipulative employees to push work onto others. A coworker might constantly claim they don't understand how to use a certain system, even after being shown multiple times. A boss might act overwhelmed and incapable of handling certain tasks, delegating all difficult work to their employees while taking credit for the results. In both cases, the manipulator avoids responsibility while others do their work for them. Feigning helplessness is particularly frustrating because it exploits kindness. The victim of this tactic often feels guilty if they refuse to help, as they don't want to appear cold or unsympathetic. The manipulator knows this and leans into it, making themselves seem more and more incapable until their victim feels obligated to take over completely. Over time, dealing with someone who constantly feigns helplessness can lead to burnout and resentment. The victim may feel as though they are doing everything while the manipulator coasts through life. The worst part is that the manipulator often enjoys playing this role because it allows them to maintain control without appearing dominant. Instead of demanding things directly, they subtly make others feel like they have no choice but to step in and save them. The best way to handle someone who feigns helplessness is to set firm boundaries. Instead of automatically jumping in to help, encourage them to take responsibility. If they say, "I don't know how to do this," respond with, "You'll figure it out." If they try to push work onto you, firmly say, "I trust that you can handle this." The key is to resist the urge to rescue them, because that is exactly what they want. Recognizing this manipulation is crucial. Real helplessness seeks solutions. Fake helplessness seeks free labor and emotional support without effort. The moment you stop responding to their exaggerated neediness, they are forced to either take responsibility or find someone else to manipulate. Either way, you free yourself from carrying a burden that was never yours to bear in the first place. Creating dependency. Creating dependency is a powerful manipulation tactic where the manipulator makes their victim emotionally, financially, or psychologically reliant on them. The ultimate goal is control. By making the victim believe they cannot function or succeed without them, the manipulator ensures that the person remains submissive and unwilling to leave the relationship, whether it's romantic, familial, professional, or social. At first, the manipulator may seem incredibly supportive, helpful, and invested in the victim's well-being. They position themselves as the one person the victim can always count on, encouraging them to turn to them for advice, decision-making, and even basic needs. Over time, they gradually strip away the victim's independence, making them feel incapable of handling life without the manipulator's guidance. One of the most common ways to create dependency is by isolating the victim from their support system. The manipulator subtly discourages them from spending time with friends and family. They might say things like, "Your friends don't really understand you like I do," or "I just worry that they don't have your best interests at heart." Over time, the victim becomes increasingly reliant on the manipulator for social and emotional support, believing that no one else truly cares about them. Another tactic is undermining the victim's confidence. The manipulator constantly criticizes or belittles their abilities, making them doubt themselves. They might say, "You always mess things up when you try to do them on your own," or "You wouldn't be able to handle things without me." These repeated messages wear down the victim's self-esteem until they genuinely believe they are incapable of managing life without the manipulator. Financial control is another way to create dependency. A manipulative partner or family member might discourage the victim from working, control their bank accounts, or insist on handling all financial decisions. Over time, the victim becomes trapped, unable to leave because they have no financial independence. In workplaces, bosses may create dependency by making employees feel they are not skilled enough to find another job. They might say things like, "No other company would appreciate you as much as we do," or "You wouldn't last a day somewhere else." Employees begin to feel stuck, fearing that leaving would result in failure. Creating emotional dependency is perhaps the most damaging aspect of this manipulation. The victim becomes addicted to the manipulator's approval. They are conditioned to seek validation from them, fearing rejection or abandonment if they displease them. The manipulator reinforces this by alternating between kindness and cruelty, making the victim desperate to stay in their good graces. The long-term effects of dependency are devastating. The victim feels trapped, incapable, and often too afraid to break free. Their self-worth becomes tied to the manipulator's opinions, making it nearly impossible to regain their independence. Breaking free from dependency requires recognizing the pattern and actively rebuilding self-sufficiency. Reconnecting with a support system, regaining financial independence, and rebuilding self-confidence are critical steps. The most important realization is that the manipulator's greatest weapon is the illusion that the victim needs them. Once the victim sees that they are fully capable of surviving and thriving without the manipulator, their control collapses. Real love and support empower people to become stronger, not weaker. Anyone who makes you feel dependent on them does not have your best interest at heart. The key to escaping this trap is understanding that true strength comes from within, not from someone who wants you to believe you can't stand on your own. Using fear as leverage. Fear is one of the strongest human emotions, and manipulators know exactly how to use it to their advantage. When someone uses fear as leverage, they create an environment where the victim feels too afraid to challenge them, leave them, or stand up for themselves. This tactic is used in relationships, families, workplaces, and even politics, keeping people trapped in a cycle of obedience and submission. Fear-based manipulation doesn't always involve outright threats. Sometimes it is subtle and psychological. The manipulator instills fear by making the victim believe that leaving, speaking up, or making independent choices will result in terrible consequences. One of the most common fear tactics is fear of abandonment. A manipulative partner may say things like, "If you leave me, you'll never find anyone else who loves you." A toxic friend might warn, "If you don't do this for me, don't expect me to be there for you anymore." This kind of emotional blackmail forces the victim into compliance, as they fear losing the relationship more than they value their own happiness. Another powerful method is fear of failure. A controlling boss might say, "If you quit this job, you'll regret it. No one else will hire you." A toxic parent might tell their child, "You'll never make it on your own. You're not strong enough." These statements plant deep insecurities, making the victim too afraid to take risks or break free. In abusive relationships, fear of retaliation is a major tool of control. The abuser might say, "If you ever leave me, I'll ruin your life." This could involve threats of exposing secrets, turning friends or family against them, or even physical harm. The victim stays not because they want to, but because they believe escape will only bring worse consequences. Some manipulators use fear of social judgment to maintain control. A manipulative friend might say, "If you don't do this, everyone is going to think you're selfish." A parent might guilt-trip their child by saying, "If you cut me off, what will people say? You'll look like a terrible person." The victim, desperate to avoid shame, complies to maintain their reputation. At a societal level, fear-based manipulation is used in politics, marketing, and media. Politicians create fear of the other side to maintain loyalty. Advertisers use fear of inadequacy to sell products. "If you don't use this, you won't be attractive enough." The strategy is always the same: make people feel afraid, then present themselves as the only solution. The long-term effects of fear-based manipulation are crippling. The victim's world shrinks as they become too afraid to take risks, stand up for themselves, or challenge authority. They become conditioned to prioritize safety over personal freedom, even if it means enduring mistreatment. Breaking free from fear-based control requires recognizing that the threats are often exaggerated or outright false. Manipulators rely on fear because they know that once the victim realizes their own power, they will lose control. The first step is questioning the fear itself. If someone says, "You'll never make it without me," ask, "Is that really true?" If they say, "Everyone will turn against you," ask, "Would the people who truly care about me do that?" Most of the time, the answer is no. The second step is taking small steps toward independence. Facing fear head-on, whether it's leaving a toxic relationship, quitting a controlling job, or setting boundaries, slowly dismantles the manipulator's hold. With every act of defiance, the victim regains more power, Fear is only as powerful as the control it has over the mind. The moment someone stops believing in the worst-case scenario and starts trusting in their own ability to handle life, the manipulator loses their strongest weapon. True freedom comes from recognizing that the things meant to keep you afraid are often just illusions designed to keep you small. Blurring boundaries. Blurring boundaries is a manipulation tactic where the manipulator slowly erodes the victim's ability to say no by crossing personal, emotional, or physical lines in small, subtle ways until the victim no longer feels in control of their own space, time, or decisions. The goal is to weaken the victim's sense of autonomy so they become more accommodating, compliant, and easier to manipulate without even realizing it. It often starts with seemingly harmless behavior. A friend might show up unannounced at your home. A partner might insist on reading your messages just to build trust. A boss might ask you to stay late just this once. Individually, these acts don't seem like a big deal, but over time, as they become more frequent, the victim begins to feel as though their comfort, privacy, or personal space is not their own. One of the most common ways manipulators blur boundaries is by making the victim feel guilty for having limits. If the victim tries to set a boundary, the manipulator will push back with statements like, "Why are you being so difficult?" or "You used to be more flexible. What changed?" They frame boundaries as selfish, unreasonable, or unnecessary, making the victim feel bad for asserting them. In relationships, blurred boundaries can be disguised as closeness or intimacy. A manipulative partner might say, "We shouldn't have any secrets from each other," as an excuse to invade privacy. They might demand constant availability, ignoring personal space or alone time. Slowly, the victim's individuality dissolves, replaced by an expectation that they exist primarily for the manipulator's needs. At work, boundary blurring is often disguised as dedication. A boss might expect employees to be available at all hours, discouraging them from setting limits between work and personal life. If an employee resists, they might hear, "We all have to make sacrifices for the company," making them feel guilty for wanting a healthy work-life balance. In friendships and families, blurred boundaries often appear in the form of emotional dumping. A manipulative friend or family member may constantly offload their problems without regard for the victim's time or emotional capacity. They demand constant support but offer none in return, creating a one-sided dynamic where the victim feels obligated to be available at all times. One of the worst aspects of boundary blurring is that it happens gradually. The victim doesn't notice it at first because the manipulator starts small, but as each little push is accepted, the manipulator pushes further. Over time, the victim stops resisting, either out of exhaustion or because they feel guilty for saying no. The effects of blurred boundaries are serious. The victim feels drained, overwhelmed, and suffocated by the constant demands. They struggle to assert themselves because they've been conditioned to feel guilty for doing so. They may even start to lose their sense of self, prioritizing the manipulator's needs over their own. Breaking free requires a firm stance on personal limits. The victim must recognize that setting boundaries is not selfish. It is necessary for self-respect. The most effective response to boundary blurring is consistency. If the manipulator complains, guilts, or pushes back, the victim must hold their ground. A simple, firm response like, "I am not comfortable with that," or "That doesn't work for me," shuts down manipulation attempts. The key to protecting boundaries is understanding that a person who truly respects you will respect your limits. A manipulator, on the other hand, will always test them. The moment you stop feeling guilty for saying no is the moment you take back control. False ultimatums. False ultimatums are a high-pressure manipulation tactic where the manipulator presents two extreme choices, forcing the victim into making a rushed or emotionally driven decision. The choices are almost always unfair, exaggerated, or misleading, designed to make the victim feel like they have no reasonable alternative except to comply with the manipulator's demands. Ultimatums are supposed to be serious, boundary-setting tools used in situations where clear consequences are necessary, but manipulators use false ultimatums not to establish fair limits, but to control, threaten, or guilt-trip others into submission. A common example in relationships is the phrase, "If you really loved me, you'd do this." This is not a genuine request. It's an emotional weapon designed to make the victim feel like refusing means they are uncaring or disloyal. The manipulator frames their demand as a test of love, forcing the victim into a no-win situation. Either they comply and feel controlled, or they refuse and feel guilty. Another common form of false ultimatum is the "it's either me or them" demand. A toxic partner or friend may say, "If you stay friends with that person, we're done," or "If you don't cut them off, I'll leave." Instead of allowing the victim to make their own choices, the manipulator uses the threat of loss to coerce obedience. In workplaces, false ultimatums can take the form of exaggerated consequences. A boss might say, "If you don't take on this extra work, I don't know if I can keep you on the team," even though job performance is not actually at risk. The goal is to pressure the employee into compliance by making them believe the stakes are much higher than they actually are. False ultimatums also appear in family dynamics. A toxic parent might say, "If you don't do this for me, I'll never forgive you," or "If you move away, don't expect me to be there for you." These statements are designed to create fear and obligation, making the victim feel as if asserting their independence means losing love and support. One of the most damaging aspects of false ultimatums is that they create unnecessary panic. The victim is put in a high-stress situation where they feel forced to make a decision quickly, often without thinking through their options. The manipulator thrives on this sense of urgency because it keeps the victim from realizing that the ultimatum itself is often a bluff. Breaking free from false ultimatums requires recognizing them for what they are: emotional traps. Instead of reacting out of fear, the victim should pause and ask, "Is this really my only choice?" In most cases, it is not. Refusing to engage in false ultimatums weakens their power. Instead of responding emotionally, the victim can call the manipulator's bluff with a calm but firm statement. "I don't respond to ultimatums," or "If that's how you feel, I respect your decision." By refusing to panic, the victim removes the manipulator's leverage. Genuine relationships are built on mutual understanding and compromise, not threats and coercion. A person who truly values you will not force you into impossible choices just to get their way. The strongest response to a false ultimatum is the realization that you do not have to play their game at all. Pity ploys. Pity ploys are a deeply manipulative tactic where the manipulator plays the victim to gain sympathy, avoid responsibility, or guilt-trip others into compliance. Instead of addressing issues directly, they exaggerate their struggles, suffering, or hardships to shift attention away from their actions and onto their supposed suffering. This method preys on the natural human instinct to help those in distress, making it a powerful way to control others without appearing aggressive. A manipulator using pity as a tool will frequently talk about how much they have sacrificed, how unfairly life has treated them, or how nobody understands their pain. They will tell long, emotionally charged stories about how they've been wronged, often leaving out key details that might show their own role in the situation. If confronted about bad behavior, they might say, "I've been through so much already, why are you attacking me?" Suddenly, the focus shifts from their wrongdoing to their supposed suffering. The person calling them out now feels guilty, backing down, or even apologizing for confronting them in the first place. Pity ploys are common in relationships. A toxic partner who has hurt their significant other may avoid accountability by saying, "I've been dealing with so much stress. I just need you to be there for me." Instead of apologizing, they make themselves look like the one in need of support. The victim, wanting to be kind, lets their own hurt feelings go unaddressed. In family dynamics, a parent might use pity to maintain control. If their child sets boundaries or distances themselves, they might say, "After everything I've done for you, you're abandoning me?" This kind of guilt-tripping forces the child to reconsider their decision, even if it was made for their own well-being. At work, a manipulative coworker might avoid responsibility by saying, "I'm under so much pressure right now, can you just handle this for me?" They never take responsibility for their tasks, yet always find ways to make others feel bad for not helping. The most dangerous aspect of pity ploys is that they create a cycle where the victim feels responsible for making the manipulator feel better. Over time, they stop expressing their own needs, believing that doing so would be selfish or insensitive toward the manipulator's supposed suffering. Breaking free from pity-based manipulation requires recognizing when sympathy is being exploited. The key question to ask is this person seeking solutions or just attention? A genuine victim wants help to improve their situation, while a manipulator using pity ploys only wants emotional validation and control. The best response to a pity ploy is to offer solutions instead of emotional reassurance. If someone constantly complains about their struggles but refuses to change their behavior, a simple, "That sounds difficult. What are you going to do about it?" shifts responsibility back onto them. If they resist taking action and instead continue seeking sympathy, it's a clear sign that their suffering is a manipulation tactic, not a real crisis. Real struggles deserve compassion. But when someone weaponizes pity to avoid responsibility, the best response is not to fall for it. Boundaries are just as important with those who play the victim as they are with those who act aggressively. Goading into emotional outbursts. Goading someone into an emotional outburst is a manipulation strategy where the manipulator deliberately provokes the victim, pushing them until they snap, then using their reaction against them. This tactic is designed to make the victim look irrational, aggressive, or overly emotional, while the manipulator plays innocent. It's a favorite tool of narcissists, toxic partners, and workplace manipulators because it allows them to maintain power while discrediting their target. It often begins with subtle jabs. The manipulator might make passive-aggressive comments, mock the victim's feelings, or intentionally bring up sensitive topics. If the victim tries to address it calmly, the manipulator dismisses them, saying things like, "You're too sensitive," or "Relax, I was just joking." These small provocations build up over time, making the victim feel unheard, frustrated, and invalidated. When subtle tactics don't work, the manipulator escalates. They might start criticizing in a more direct way, contradicting everything the victim says, or twisting their words to create an argument. The goal is to make the victim feel trapped, exhausted, and overwhelmed until they finally explode. The moment the victim reacts emotionally, raising their voice, crying, or becoming visibly upset, the manipulator immediately switches roles. Suddenly, they are the calm, rational one, shaking their head and saying, "See? This is exactly what I mean. You're crazy." They may even play the victim, acting like they are being attacked by the victim's outburst, even though they deliberately caused it. This tactic is highly effective in relationships. A toxic partner may subtly belittle their significant other for days or weeks, making them feel unheard and on edge. When the victim finally snaps, the manipulator says, "Wow, look at how you treat me. No wonder we have problems." Now, instead of discussing the manipulator's mistreatment, the victim is left defending themselves, apologizing for their reaction. In workplaces, manipulative bosses or coworkers use this tactic to push people to their breaking point. A boss may keep piling on extra work, dismissing concerns, and making unreasonable demands. When the employee finally protests, the boss acts shocked, saying, "I don't know why you're making such a big deal out of this." This allows them to frame the employee as difficult, unprofessional, or unstable. In families, a toxic parent or sibling might make cutting remarks, compare the victim to others, or bring up old mistakes. The moment the victim reacts emotionally, they are labeled as dramatic or disrespectful. Meanwhile, the manipulator pretends to be calm and mature, reinforcing the idea that the victim is the problem. The long-term effects of this tactic are devastating. Victims begin to doubt themselves, wondering if they are actually too emotional or unstable. They become hyper-aware of their reactions, suppressing emotions to avoid being proven wrong. Over time, this self-doubt erodes confidence and makes the victim more susceptible to further manipulation. Breaking free from this cycle requires emotional control, not for the manipulator's sake, but for your own power. When a manipulator tries to provoke you, the best response is detachment. Instead of reacting, maintain composure and refuse to engage emotionally. A simple, "I see what you're doing, and I'm not playing this game," is enough to shut them down. Another effective strategy is mirroring their calmness. If they act composed while trying to provoke you, match their tone. Respond with short, neutral statements like, "Interesting perspective," or "I hear you." This denies them the emotional reaction they are looking for, frustrating them and making their manipulation ineffective. Most importantly, remember, your reaction is their ammunition. The moment you refuse to give them an outburst, they lose control. They thrive on making you look irrational, but when you remain calm and unshaken, their tactics backfire. The best way to win against someone who tries to provoke you is not to fight harder, but to stop playing their game altogether. Weaponized insecurity. Weaponized insecurity is a ruthless manipulation tactic where someone deliberately exploits another person's fears, doubts, or weaknesses to gain control over them. Instead of supporting or uplifting the victim, the manipulator subtly or overtly highlights their insecurities, making them feel inadequate, unworthy, or dependent. The more the victim doubts themselves, the easier they are to control. The manipulation often starts with small, seemingly harmless comments. A partner might say, "Are you sure that outfit looks good on you?" A friend might casually remark, "You've never been great at socializing." A boss might say, "I don't think you're quite ready for a leadership role yet." These statements, while not outright insults, plant seeds of doubt in the victim's mind. Over time, these doubts grow into deep insecurities, making the victim constantly question themselves. In relationships, a toxic partner may use weaponized insecurity to keep their significant other feeling unworthy of love. They might comment on their appearance, intelligence, or social skills in ways that lower their confidence. When the victim starts feeling insecure, they cling to the manipulator for validation, believing they aren't good enough for anyone else. The manipulator reinforces this idea with statements like, "No one else would put up with you the way I do." In friendships, a manipulative person might constantly remind their friend of their past failures, social awkwardness, or weaknesses. Instead of encouraging growth, they keep their friend in a state of self-doubt. The more the friend questions their worth, the more power the manipulator holds over them. At work, weaponized insecurity is used to keep employees from realizing their true potential. A manipulative boss might say, "You're not quite leadership material, but if you work harder, maybe one day." They subtly discourage confidence, ensuring the employee never feels secure enough to ask for a raise or seek better opportunities elsewhere. Parents can also use weaponized insecurity to control their children. A toxic parent might say things like, "You've always been the irresponsible one," or "I don't think you'd survive on your own." These statements are designed to make the child feel incapable of independence, keeping them emotionally tethered to the parent. The most dangerous aspect of weaponized insecurity is that the victim often doesn't realize they are being manipulated. They internalize the negative comments, believing they are simply facing hard truths about themselves. Over time, they become less confident, more dependent on the manipulator's approval, and more afraid to take risks or assert their own desires. Breaking free from this tactic requires recognizing the manipulation for what it is. If someone repeatedly makes you doubt yourself instead of encouraging your growth, they are not helping you. They are controlling you. Surrounding yourself with supportive people who build confidence rather than tear it down is crucial. Additionally, keeping a personal record of achievements and strengths can help counteract the manipulator's voice in your head. The biggest lie manipulators tell is that you are not enough. The truth is, your insecurities do not define you. Your ability to grow past them does. The moment you refuse to let someone else dictate your worth, their power over you disappears. Inducing shame. Inducing shame is a deeply psychological manipulation tactic where the manipulator makes the victim feel fundamentally flawed, unworthy, or guilty for who they are, what they believe, or how they behave. Unlike guilt, which is about feeling bad for something you did, shame is about feeling bad for who you are. The goal of the manipulator is to make the victim believe they are inherently broken or unlovable, keeping them in a state of low self-esteem and self-doubt. It often begins with subtle judgment. The manipulator may raise an eyebrow at a comment, sigh heavily after the victim speaks, or use a condescending tone when responding. Over time, these micro-reactions train the victim to feel ashamed of expressing themselves. In relationships, a toxic partner may induce shame by making their significant other feel wrong for their emotions. If the victim expresses sadness or frustration, the manipulator might say, "You're always so dramatic," or "No wonder people have a hard time dealing with you." Instead of addressing the issue, the victim now feels ashamed for even having emotions. Parents often use shame to control children. A parent might say, "You always disappoint me," or "Why can't you be more like your sibling?" These statements attack the child's identity rather than their actions, making them feel like they are inherently unworthy of love or approval. This kind of deep-seated shame can follow a person into adulthood, shaping how they see themselves and interact with the world. In social groups, shame is used to enforce conformity. A manipulative friend might say, "You still believe in that? Wow, that's embarrassing," making the victim feel foolish for their beliefs. By making someone feel ashamed of their opinions, values, or lifestyle choices, the manipulator pressures them into changing just to gain approval. Workplaces can also be breeding grounds for shame-based manipulation. A boss might publicly humiliate an employee by saying, "I expected better from you," in front of their peers. By making the employee feel deeply ashamed of their mistakes, they discourage them from speaking up, setting boundaries, or advocating for themselves. Religious and cultural shame is another form of control. Some groups use shame to keep members obedient, making them feel as though questioning beliefs or stepping outside norms means they are morally corrupt or betraying their identity. The underlying message is always the same: you are bad, and only by conforming can you be good again. One of the most dangerous aspects of induced shame is that it becomes internalized. The victim starts to police themselves, avoiding actions, thoughts, or desires that might trigger more shame. They shrink themselves, trying to be acceptable in the eyes of the manipulator. Over time, they become disconnected from their true self, always seeking approval instead of embracing authenticity. The best way to fight back against shame-based manipulation is to reject the idea that you are inherently flawed. No one has the right to make you feel ashamed for being yourself. Recognizing when shame is being used as a tool of control is the first step in breaking free. Ask yourself, does this person truly want to help me grow, or are they making me feel bad just to control me? Healing from shame requires self-compassion. Instead of accepting the manipulator's narrative, remind yourself that your worth is not dependent on someone else's approval. Seeking out supportive environments where you are valued for who you truly are, rather than judged for not meeting someone else's expectations, is essential. Shame only holds power when you believe it. The moment you stop letting others define your worth, the chains of manipulation fall away. True strength comes from embracing who you are without apology. Anyone who tries to make you feel otherwise is not someone who deserves a place in your life. Breadcrumbing. Breadcrumbing is a manipulation tactic where someone gives just enough attention, affection, or validation to keep the victim interested, but never enough to actually satisfy or fulfill them. The manipulator dangles small crumbs of hope, keeping the victim emotionally invested, all while avoiding real commitment, responsibility, or consistency. At first, breadcrumbing can feel like genuine interest or care. The manipulator might send a sweet text, make a vague promise about the future, or act affectionate just often enough to keep the victim from walking away. But when it comes to follow-through, they always fall short. They disappear, ignore messages, or make excuses for why they just can't be there consistently. Just when the victim starts to lose interest, the manipulator throws out another crumb, just enough to keep them hooked. In romantic relationships, breadcrumbing is a classic tactic used by emotionally unavailable partners. They might say things like, "I see a future with you someday," or "I really like you, I'm just not ready for anything serious right now." But they never take real steps toward commitment. They might flirt over text, but never make plans to meet. They might keep an ex or potential partners lingering, ensuring they always have someone waiting for them without actually having to invest in a real relationship. In friendships, breadcrumbing looks like someone who only reaches out when they need something. They might act friendly, promise to catch up soon, or hint at making plans, but those plans never actually materialize. The victim is left wondering, are we actually friends, or am I just convenient for them? In workplaces, breadcrumbing happens when a boss or manager makes vague promises about promotions, raises, or career opportunities, but never delivers. They might say, "If you just stick around a little longer, there's something great coming your way," or "You're definitely on track for that raise, just be patient." But the reward never comes. The goal is to keep employees invested without actually having to compensate them fairly. Breadcrumbing is so effective because it keeps the victim in a state of hope. They believe that if they just wait a little longer, try a little harder, or prove themselves just a bit more, things will change. But they never do. The manipulator has no intention of providing what they are promising. They just want to keep the victim from leaving. The only way to break free from breadcrumbing is to recognize the pattern. If someone's words don't align with their actions, they are stringing you along. Instead of holding on to hope for what might happen, focus on what is happening. If the only thing keeping you invested is potential, walk away. Real connections, whether in love, friendship, or work, are built on consistency, not empty promises. You deserve more than crumbs, and once you stop accepting them, you free yourself to find the whole meal elsewhere. Moving the goalposts. Moving the goalposts is a form of manipulation where the manipulator constantly changes the standards, expectations, or requirements for success, ensuring that the victim never feels like they are good enough. Just when the victim thinks they have met the demands, the rules change. The goal is to keep the victim in a perpetual state of striving, uncertainty, and self-doubt. This tactic is often used by toxic bosses, abusive partners, manipulative parents, and unfair authority figures who never actually want to see the victim succeed. They just want to maintain control. In relationships, moving the goalposts might look like a partner who keeps raising the bar for what it takes to earn their love or approval. At first, they might say, "I just need you to be more supportive." When the victim makes an effort to be more supportive, they say, "I need someone who is more exciting." No matter how much the victim changes, improves, or compromises, it's never enough. The manipulator ensures that their love or approval is always out of reach. In workplaces, a boss might tell an employee, "If you take on this extra project, I'll consider you for a promotion." After the project is successfully completed, the boss changes the conditions. "You still need more experience," or "Let's revisit this in a few months." Each time the employee meets the new expectation, another one is introduced. The goal is to keep them working hard without ever actually rewarding them. Parents can also use this tactic to keep their children in a state of emotional dependence. A toxic parent might tell a child, "If you get straight A's, I'll be proud of you." When the child achieves this, the parent says, "Well, grades don't matter unless you also excel at sports." No matter what the child does, the approval they seek is always just out of reach. In friendships and social circles, goalposts can be moved to maintain superiority. A manipulative friend might say, "You need to be more fun." When the victim makes an effort to go out more, they respond, "You try too hard." The victim is left feeling confused and frustrated, unable to ever meet the ever-changing expectations. The psychological effects of this tactic are devastating. The victim begins to believe that they are the problem, that they are somehow inherently unworthy. They internalize the idea that they are never good enough and continue striving, hoping that one day they will finally reach the manipulator's impossible standard. Breaking free from this cycle requires recognizing that the problem is not the victim's effort. It's the manipulator's ever-changing expectations. A fair and honest person does not keep shifting the rules just to keep someone feeling inadequate. The key to escaping is setting your own standards for self-worth and success. If someone constantly changes the expectations to keep you feeling less than, stop playing their game. You don't need to prove yourself to someone who has no intention of ever being satisfied. Walk away and set your own goalposts, ones that don't move based on someone else's manipulation. Twisting words. Twisting words is a psychological manipulation tactic where a person distorts, misrepresents, or alters what someone else has said to create confusion, frustration, and self-doubt. The goal is to make the victim question their own words, defend themselves over something they never meant, or feel as though they are constantly in the wrong. This tactic is particularly effective in arguments, gaslighting, and power struggles in relationships, friendships, workplaces, and public discourse. The manipulation often begins subtly. A person might take a simple statement and exaggerate it into something extreme. If the victim expresses a concern by saying, "I don't think we should rush into this decision," the manipulator may respond with, "So, you never want to commit to anything?" By twisting the original statement into an extreme version, the victim is immediately put on the defensive. If they express frustration, the manipulator may escalate with, "Wow, I can't believe you hate me so much, even though no such words were spoken." The conversation shifts from the real issue to a battle over what was supposedly said, trapping the victim in a cycle of explaining and defending themselves. In relationships, a manipulative partner might use this tactic to avoid accountability. When confronted about their behavior, instead of addressing the concern, they may say, "Oh, so now I'm a horrible person? I guess I can't do anything right. By shifting the focus to their own supposed victimhood, they make the other person feel guilty for even bringing up the issue. In friendships, twisting words can be used to stir drama and create division. A manipulative friend may say, "I heard you said you don't like me," when all the victim actually said was, "I wish we talked more honestly." By distorting the message, the manipulator turns a simple concern into a conflict, making the victim appear hostile when they were never being malicious. Workplaces are another environment where this tactic is frequently used. A toxic boss or coworker may take constructive criticism and misinterpret it as an attack, responding with, "Oh, so you think you're better than everyone else?" This discourages open discussion and creates a culture of fear where employees hesitate to speak their minds. In its most extreme form, twisting words is a core component of gaslighting. A manipulator may repeatedly tell someone, "That's not what you said," or "You're remembering it wrong," until the victim starts doubting their own memory and perception of reality. The most effective way to counter this tactic is to remain calm and refuse to engage in their distortion. Instead of getting trapped in an endless cycle of explanation, restating the original statement with clarity and confidence shuts down the manipulation. If they persist, a simple response like, "That's not what I said, and you know it," prevents them from further twisting reality. In more serious cases, keeping records of conversations, such as texts, emails, or notes, can provide undeniable proof against their distortions. Twisting words is designed to make the victim feel confused and emotionally exhausted, but once the manipulation is recognized, its power weakens. The key is not to let them rewrite reality, because once they control the narrative, they control the person. Backhanded compliments. A backhanded compliment is an insult disguised as praise, designed to subtly undermine, criticize, or devalue the recipient while appearing polite or well-meaning. This form of manipulation allows the person delivering the insult to maintain plausible deniability, making it difficult for the victim to call them out without appearing overly sensitive. When confronted, the manipulator often acts surprised, saying, "I was just giving you a compliment. Why are you so defensive?" This forces the victim to either accept the hidden insult or risk being labeled as irrational. These disguised insults often carry a subtle dig within a seemingly positive statement. Instead of outright criticism, the manipulator will lace their words with condescension. A person might say, "You're really pretty for someone your age," implying that aging normally makes someone unattractive. Another example could be, "You actually look good in that outfit," which suggests that the person usually does not. A coworker might say, "You're surprisingly good at this for someone so new," making it sound like they expected failure rather than competence. In a more passive-aggressive way, someone might remark, "Wow, I wish I had the confidence to wear that," subtly implying that the outfit is questionable rather than flattering. Backhanded compliments are often used in competitive friendships, workplace rivalries, and toxic relationships. A manipulative friend might say, "I love that you don't care what people think about your fashion choices," making it sound like a compliment, while subtly suggesting that their style is odd or out of place. In professional settings, a rival may remark, "It's impressive that you got that promotion. Luck must have been on your side," implying that the success was due to luck rather than skill. These small, calculated digs make the recipient feel unsettled, creating a sense of self-doubt while allowing the manipulator to appear innocent. In romantic relationships, backhanded compliments are frequently used to lower self-esteem and establish dominance. A toxic partner may say, "I love how you don't stress about looking perfect like other women do," which seems positive at first, but ultimately makes the person feel unattractive. The hidden message suggests that they are not beautiful by traditional standards, but should be grateful that their partner accepts them anyway. Parents can also use this tactic to maintain control over their children. A toxic parent might say, "I'm so proud of you for finally acting responsible," which implies that they were previously irresponsible. These subtle digs reinforce the idea that the child will never be quite good enough in the parent's eyes, keeping them in a cycle of seeking approval. The long-term effects of repeated backhanded compliments are harmful as they chip away at self-confidence and create a constant state of self-doubt. The victim may find themselves trying to prove that they are actually talented, attractive, or intelligent, even though they never questioned these things before the manipulation began. This form of psychological warfare forces the victim into an endless loop of seeking validation from the manipulator, who continues to maintain control by offering crumbs of approval laced with subtle insults. The best way to handle backhanded compliments is to either confront them directly or respond with strategic indifference. A calm but firm statement such as, "That sounded more like an insult than a compliment," can expose the manipulation and put the person on the spot. If the goal is to shut it down without conflict, a neutral response like, "Interesting perspective," or a dry, "Thanks, I guess," takes the power out of the insult. Either way, the key is to refuse to react emotionally, as manipulators thrive on making their targets feel insecure. Backhanded compliments are never about genuine praise. They are about control and subtle put-downs. The moment you recognize them for what they are, they lose their ability to influence your self-worth. True compliments uplift, while disguised insults tear down. Anyone who consistently makes you doubt yourself under the pretense of flattery is not someone who genuinely supports you. Rewriting history. Rewriting history is a manipulative tactic where a person distorts, alters, or outright denies past events to change the narrative in their favor. The goal is to shift blame, erase accountability, or make the victim question their own memory. This form of manipulation is often used in gaslighting, where the manipulator systematically alters details of the past to make their target doubt reality. The manipulation usually begins subtly. A person may claim that a conversation didn't happen the way the victim remembers, or that certain details have been exaggerated. Over time, these small distortions become larger until the entire story is rewritten to suit the manipulator's agenda. If the victim recalls an argument where they were mistreated, the manipulator may say, "That's not what happened at all. You were the one yelling, not me." By confidently asserting a false version of events, they create uncertainty in the victim's mind, making them second-guess their own memory. In relationships, rewriting history is often used to avoid responsibility. A toxic partner might deny ever making hurtful comments, saying, "I never said that. You must be imagining things." If confronted about a pattern of bad behavior, they might insist, "You're overreacting. We've always been happy. Why are you suddenly making things up?" This revisionist storytelling is meant to make the victim feel like they are misinterpreting reality, leading them to question whether they are being too sensitive or irrational. In friendships, a manipulative person may rewrite history to paint themselves as the victim. If they betrayed a friend's trust, they might later claim, "I was only trying to help. You took it the wrong way." If they abandon someone in a time of need, they might say, "I was always there for you. You just don't remember." These false narratives make it difficult for the victim to hold the manipulator accountable, as they are constantly fighting against a fabricated version of events. At work, a toxic boss or coworker may rewrite history to avoid blame for mistakes. If an employee raises concerns about mistreatment, they may hear, "I never said that. You must have misunderstood." If a project fails due to poor leadership, the manipulator might insist, "I told you exactly what needed to be done. If you didn't listen, that's on you." By rewriting history, they protect their own reputation while shifting blame onto others. Rewriting history can also be used in family dynamics, particularly in cases where a parent refuses to acknowledge past harm. If a child recalls neglect or mistreatment, a toxic parent may say, "You had a great childhood. You're just being dramatic." They may even create a completely false narrative, claiming, "I sacrificed everything for you," when the reality was quite the opposite. This form of manipulation is so effective because it preys on the imperfection of human memory. No one remembers every detail perfectly, and the manipulator exploits this fact. They speak with confidence, assert their false version of events, and make the victim feel unsure. Over time, the victim may begin to accept the rewritten history, feeling too exhausted to keep fighting over the past. The best way to counter this tactic is to trust your memory, and if possible, keep a record of important conversations and events. Writing things down, saving messages, or confiding in a trusted person can help prevent self-doubt. If someone persistently denies reality, the best response is, "I know what happened, and I'm not going to argue about it." Engaging in their distorted version of the past only gives them more power. Once you stop questioning yourself, their manipulation loses its grip. Feigning ignorance. Feigning ignorance is a manipulation tactic where someone pretends they don't understand something in order to avoid responsibility, delay confrontation, or frustrate the victim into giving up. The goal is to create confusion, shift blame, and make the victim feel as if they are overcomplicating things or expecting too much. By acting clueless, the manipulator evades accountability while placing the burden of explanation, effort, or problem-solving onto the victim. The manipulation often begins in subtle ways. A person may pretend they forgot an important conversation, saying, "I don't remember you ever telling me that." They may feign confusion when confronted about their behavior, responding with, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Instead of addressing the issue, they act as though they are completely unaware, forcing the victim to either explain everything again or simply drop the matter out of frustration. In relationships, feigning ignorance is commonly used to avoid difficult conversations. A manipulative partner might say, "I didn't realize you were upset," when they were clearly aware of the issue but chose to ignore it. If confronted about broken promises, they might claim, "I didn't know it meant that much to you." By pretending they were unaware, they make the victim feel unreasonable for expecting them to act differently. In friendships, this tactic is often used to escape responsibility. If a friend cancels plans repeatedly, they might say, "Oh, was that today? I totally forgot," even though they were reminded multiple times. If they hurt someone with a rude comment, they might claim, "I didn't know that would offend you," despite having a history of similar behavior. By pretending not to understand, they avoid having to acknowledge the impact of their actions. At work, feigning ignorance can be used to shift work onto others. A lazy coworker might act confused about a task, saying, "I don't know how to do this. Can you just handle it?" A boss who wants to avoid responsibility might claim, "I never saw that email," when confronted about failing to respond. This forces others to either take on the extra work themselves or go through the exhausting process of explaining things over and over. In family dynamics, feigning ignorance can be used to invalidate another person's feelings. A toxic parent might say, "I had no idea you felt that way," after years of ignoring their child's emotional needs. Siblings or relatives might claim, "I didn't know you needed help," after failing to step up in a crisis. This form of manipulation shifts the blame onto the victim, making them feel as if they should have expressed themselves more clearly, even when they already did. One of the most frustrating aspects of feigning ignorance is that it creates emotional exhaustion. The victim is forced to repeat themselves, provide proof, or lower their expectations, all while the manipulator continues to act clueless. Over time, this tactic makes the victim feel like they are demanding too much, when in reality, the manipulator is simply avoiding effort or accountability. The best way to counter feigned ignorance is to stop playing the game. If someone repeatedly claims they don't understand something that they should understand, refuse to keep explaining. A firm response like, "I've already explained this and I'm not doing it again," shuts down the manipulation. If they pretend to forget past agreements, respond with, "You are aware of this, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." By refusing to engage with their false confusion, you take away the power of the tactic. Feigning ignorance is not about lack of understanding. It is about deliberate avoidance. Once you recognize it for what it is, you can stop wasting time proving, explaining, or justifying yourself to someone who understands more than they are willing to admit. The key is to see through their act and hold them accountable, even when they pretend not to know what's happening. Strategic compliments. Strategic compliments are a subtle form of manipulation where praise is used not as genuine encouragement, but as a calculated tool to control, influence, or destabilize the recipient. Unlike backhanded compliments, which are disguised insults, strategic compliments are carefully crafted to create dependency, shift power dynamics, or soften resistance to manipulation. The manipulation often starts with targeted flattery. The manipulator identifies an area where the victim craves validation, intelligence, beauty, work ethic, kindness, and uses compliments to exploit that desire. A boss might say, "You're the only one I can really trust with this," right before overloading an employee with extra work. A partner might say, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me," right before asking for something unreasonable. A friend might say, "I admire how generous you are," knowing it will guilt the victim into doing them another favor. Strategic compliments can also be used to subtly control behavior. If a manipulator wants someone to act a certain way, they will praise them in advance for already doing it. A toxic partner who doesn't want their significant other to go out with friends might say, "I love how you're not like other people who always need to be out partying." Now, if the victim does choose to go out, they will feel as though they are disappointing or betraying this flattering perception. Another tactic involves creating dependency through selective praise. The manipulator will give compliments inconsistently, making the victim crave their approval. Sometimes they will praise the victim's intelligence or attractiveness, and other times they will remain silent or subtly withhold validation. The unpredictability makes the victim work harder to gain the manipulator's approval, reinforcing the power imbalance. In workplaces, strategic compliments are often used to extract effort without reward. A boss might tell an employee, "You're such a team player, always willing to go the extra mile," as a way to pressure them into unpaid overtime. The flattery makes the employee feel valued, even though they are being exploited. In relationships, a manipulator may use grand compliments to distract from bad behavior. If they have been distant, unfaithful, or neglectful, they may suddenly shower their partner with affection, saying things like, "I've never met anyone as amazing as you." This emotional high makes the victim forget about their concerns, allowing the manipulator to evade accountability. The most dangerous aspect of strategic compliments is that they create self-doubt. The victim starts questioning whether the manipulator is really toxic or if they are actually being supportive. After all, why would someone who compliments them be trying to control them? The cycle of flattery and subtle coercion makes it difficult to recognize the manipulation. Breaking free from this tactic requires examining patterns, not words. Genuine compliments come freely and consistently, while manipulative compliments appear right before a request, after mistreatment, or in moments where the manipulator needs control. The best response is to recognize when praise is being used as a tool rather than an expression of sincerity. If a compliment feels like it comes with an invisible price, chances are it does. True compliments build confidence. Strategic ones create control. The moment you recognize the difference, the manipulation loses its power. Creating uncertainty. Creating uncertainty is a psychological manipulation tactic where the manipulator keeps the victim in a constant state of doubt, making them unsure of themselves, their choices, or even reality itself. The goal is to destabilize the victim's confidence so that they become dependent on the manipulator for guidance, validation, or decision-making. The manipulation often begins with contradictory behavior. A person may be warm and affectionate one moment, then cold and distant the next, leaving the victim confused about where they stand. If a partner says, "You mean everything to me," but then disappears for days without explanation, the victim is left wondering what went wrong. This inconsistency keeps them on edge, always trying to adjust their behavior to regain the manipulator's affection. Uncertainty can also be created through vague or shifting expectations. In workplaces, a manipulative boss might keep changing job requirements, making an employee feel like they are never meeting the standard. One day, the expectation is to be proactive. The next, it's to wait for instructions. This keeps the employee second-guessing themselves, too insecure to demand fair treatment. In relationships, a manipulator might say things like, "I don't know if we're right for each other," or "maybe we should take a break," without ever fully ending things. This uncertainty keeps their partner emotionally invested, trying to prove their worth instead of recognizing they are being strung along. The manipulator maintains control by never offering clear answers, keeping the victim in a perpetual state of waiting. Another powerful method of creating uncertainty is through contradictory feedback. A manipulative friend, boss, or partner might one day praise the victim for a trait, and another day criticize them for the exact same thing. They may say, "I love how independent you are," but later complain, "You never let me help you." The victim, unable to pin down what the manipulator actually wants, bends over backward trying to meet their shifting expectations. In family dynamics, uncertainty is often created by inconsistent affection. A toxic parent might be loving and supportive one day, then emotionally distant or critical the next. The child, desperate for approval, constantly tries to earn love that is given at random. This conditioning follows them into adulthood, making them vulnerable to other manipulators who use the same push-pull technique. Socially, uncertainty is used to keep people walking on eggshells. A manipulator might give mixed signals about their mood or intentions, leaving their target anxious and hyper-aware of every interaction. If a person says, "I'm fine," while clearly acting upset, they create an environment where the victim is always guessing, always trying to avoid an unseen landmine. The long-term effects of constant uncertainty are self-doubt, anxiety, and dependence. The victim becomes afraid of making decisions, fearful of saying the wrong thing, and reliant on the manipulator for guidance. They start questioning their own instincts, believing that if they could just figure out what the manipulator wants, everything will be okay. But that moment never comes, because the uncertainty is intentional. The best way to break free from this manipulation is to recognize the pattern and trust your own reality. If someone constantly shifts their expectations, affection, or behavior, it's not because you are doing something wrong, it's because they are keeping you in a controlled state of confusion. Instead of trying to adapt to their inconsistency, step back and ask, is this relationship making me feel secure, or is it making me doubt myself? Clarity is not something that real love, friendship, or leadership withholds. Anyone who deliberately keeps you in a state of uncertainty is not helping you grow. They are keeping you small and dependent. The most powerful response is to stop waiting for clarity from someone who thrives on keeping you in the dark. Recognize the game, step away, and reclaim your ability to trust yourself. Withholding affection. Withholding affection is a deeply manipulative tactic where a person deliberately withdraws love, attention, or emotional warmth as a means of control. This silent form of punishment is designed to make the victim feel insecure, desperate for approval, and willing to do whatever it takes to regain the affection that was taken away. Unlike outright aggression, which is obvious and easy to recognize, withholding affection is subtle, making the victim question whether they are truly being mistreated or if they are simply not good enough. This manipulation usually follows a pattern. The manipulator will initially provide warmth, kindness, and validation, making the victim feel loved and valued. Then, suddenly, they withdraw, becoming distant, cold, or indifferent. The victim, confused and craving the return of that warmth, begins trying harder to please them, apologizing unnecessarily or questioning what they did wrong. Instead of addressing any real issue, the manipulator remains emotionally unavailable, forcing the victim into a position of submission. In romantic relationships, this tactic is devastating. A partner who once showered their significant other with affection may suddenly become emotionally detached, refusing to respond to texts, avoiding eye contact, or giving vague, dismissive answers. If the victim asks what's wrong, they might hear, "I just need space," or "You're overreacting." No clear explanation is given, leaving the victim in emotional limbo. The longer the affection is withheld, the more desperate the victim becomes to fix the situation, when in reality there was nothing to fix except the manipulator's need for control. Withholding affection also happens in friendships, where a friend who was once supportive and engaging suddenly becomes cold or distant, often in response to something trivial or unspoken. When confronted, they might respond with, "I just don't feel like talking right now," without offering any clarity. This passive-aggressive punishment forces the victim to chase after them, seeking reassurance. In workplaces, bosses or colleagues might use this tactic to create emotional dependency. A boss may act highly supportive when an employee is working late, then suddenly become indifferent if that same employee requests a day off. By making emotional warmth conditional, the manipulator ensures that the victim remains eager to please, always striving for approval that is intentionally withheld. In families, toxic parents frequently use withholding affection to control children. A parent might suddenly become emotionally distant when the child does something they disapprove of, refusing to acknowledge them, speak to them, or even show basic warmth. Instead of explaining the issue, they force the child to feel guilt and anxiety, making them desperate for the parent's love again. This pattern creates a lifetime of insecurity, making the child more vulnerable to similar manipulation in adulthood. The emotional impact of this tactic is profound. The victim often internalizes the belief that love must be earned, that they are only worthy of affection if they behave in a way that pleases others. Over time, they may begin suppressing their needs, avoiding confrontation, and prioritizing other people's emotions over their own, just to avoid the pain of being shut out again. Breaking free from this manipulation requires recognizing that real love is not conditional. True affection does not disappear as a form of punishment. If someone repeatedly withholds warmth, attention, or connection as a way to make you chase them, they are not offering love. They are offering control. The best response is to stop playing the game. Instead of scrambling to win back affection, step back and recognize the unhealthy pattern. Emotional connection should be mutual, not something dangled over your head like a prize for obedience. The key to overcoming this manipulation is understanding that your worth is not determined by someone else's ability to withhold or give affection. Once you stop seeking approval from someone who thrives on keeping you insecure, their control collapses. Real love does not disappear when you make a mistake. Anyone who weaponizes emotional distance against you is not someone who truly cares about your well-being. Shaming emotional reactions. Shaming emotional reactions is a form of manipulation where a person makes someone feel guilty, weak, or irrational for expressing their emotions. The goal is to make the victim suppress their feelings, doubt their own reactions, and ultimately become easier to control. Instead of allowing the victim to feel and process emotions naturally, the manipulator belittles, mocks, or invalidates their responses, making them feel ashamed for simply being human. This tactic often begins with subtle dismissals. If the victim expresses frustration, sadness, or hurt, the manipulator may respond with phrases like, "You're being dramatic," or "You're too sensitive." The underlying message is that the victim's emotions are exaggerated or inappropriate. Over time, the victim begins second-guessing their own feelings, wondering if they are truly overreacting instead of recognizing that their emotions are valid. In romantic relationships, this tactic is frequently used to avoid accountability. If one partner is hurt by something the other did and expresses their feelings, the manipulator may respond with, "Oh my God, why are you always making such a big deal out of everything?" Instead of acknowledging the harm caused, they shift the focus onto the victim's reaction, making them feel foolish for even bringing it up. Shaming emotional reactions is especially common in family dynamics. A toxic parent may tell their child, "Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about," training them to suppress their emotions from a young age. Over time, the child learns that showing sadness, fear, or frustration leads to rejection or punishment, making them emotionally closed off as they grow older. In adulthood, they may struggle to express emotions or feel guilty whenever they experience strong feelings, fearing they will be shamed again. In friendships, manipulators use this tactic to invalidate concerns and avoid difficult conversations. If someone calls out a friend's hurtful behavior, the response might be, "You're being too sensitive. It was just a joke." Instead of taking responsibility, the manipulator frames the victim as irrational, discouraging them from ever expressing their feelings again. Workplaces are also breeding grounds for this manipulation. A toxic boss may tell an employee, "You need to toughen up," after they raise concerns about unfair treatment. By labeling emotional responses as unprofessional, they discourage employees from speaking up about mistreatment. This makes it easier for them to maintain control, as employees begin to feel that expressing discomfort makes them weak. The long-term effects of shaming emotional reactions are severe. Victims may develop emotional repression, bottling up feelings instead of expressing them. Over time, this can lead to anxiety, depression, and even physical symptoms such as stress-related illnesses. The constant invalidation makes them doubt their own perceptions, making them more susceptible to further manipulation. They may begin apologizing for their emotions, convincing themselves that their feelings are burdensome rather than natural. The best way to counter this manipulation is to trust your emotions and set boundaries. If someone consistently dismisses or shames your feelings, recognize that this is not normal or acceptable behavior. A healthy response to emotions involves understanding, not ridicule. If someone mocks your feelings, respond with confidence. "My emotions are valid, and I don't need to justify them to you." If they insist on belittling you, walk away. No explanation needed. Healing from emotional shaming requires unlearning the belief that emotions are something to be ashamed of. Feelings are natural, and they do not need to be suppressed to make others comfortable. Anyone who tries to make you feel weak for expressing yourself is not someone who values you. They are someone who wants to control you. The most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept their narrative and stand firm in your right to feel, express, and process emotions without shame. Intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement is one of the most powerful and insidious manipulation tactics, where a person alternates between giving affection, approval, or rewards and suddenly withdrawing them. This creates an unpredictable cycle of emotional highs and lows, keeping the victim addicted to the relationship or situation. The inconsistency makes the victim work harder for the manipulator's attention, always chasing the next good moment while enduring long stretches of neglect, cruelty, or indifference. This tactic is particularly effective because it mirrors gambling addiction. Just like a slot machine that occasionally pays out, intermittent reinforcement makes the victim feel that if they just try a little harder, behave a little better, or stay patient a little longer, they will be rewarded with love, kindness, or approval. The uncertainty is what keeps them hooked. If the mistreatment were constant, they would likely leave. But the occasional acts of kindness, especially when they come after a period of emotional neglect, create an intense sense of relief and hope. In romantic relationships, this plays out as a toxic cycle. A manipulative partner may be cold, distant, or even cruel for days or weeks, making their partner feel unloved and desperate. Just when the victim begins to consider leaving, the manipulator suddenly flips the script, showering them with love, attention, and promises of change. This sudden affection feels euphoric because it comes after emotional starvation. But just as quickly as they offer warmth, they withdraw again, keeping the victim trapped in an endless cycle of emotional ups and downs. In friendships, intermittent reinforcement keeps the victim loyal to a toxic friend. The friend may ignore messages, cancel plans, or be dismissive most of the time, but every now and then they will be incredibly warm, making the victim feel valued again. This creates a situation where the victim holds on, remembering the good times, and believing that their friend still cares deep down. In workplaces, manipulative bosses use this tactic to keep employees striving for approval. A boss might be hypercritical most of the time, but will occasionally give unexpected praise or recognition. The employee, desperate for more moments of approval, continues to overwork themselves, hoping for another rare compliment. The unpredictability of praise makes them put in even more effort, never realizing that they are being conditioned into obedience. Family members, particularly narcissistic parents, use intermittent reinforcement to keep control over their children. A toxic parent may be emotionally distant, dismissive, or harsh, but on rare occasions, they suddenly become affectionate and proud. The child, eager to regain their parents' love, continues seeking approval, always hoping for another moment of warmth. This pattern often carries into adulthood, where the child-turned-adult struggles with self-worth, always chasing the approval of emotionally unavailable people. The psychological effects of intermittent reinforcement are devastating. The victim develops emotional dependency, feeling unable to leave because they remember the good moments too vividly. They rationalize the bad times, thinking, if I just hold on a little longer, things will go back to how they were. Over time, they lose sight of what a healthy, stable relationship looks like, confusing emotional intensity with genuine love. The best way to break free from intermittent reinforcement is to recognize the cycle and refuse to play along. Instead of focusing on the rare moments of affection, look at the overall pattern. If someone is only kind sometimes, but cruel or indifferent most of the time, that is not love, that is control. The healthiest relationships are consistent, not based on unpredictable highs and crushing lows. Once you stop reacting to the manipulator's cycle of reward and withdrawal, their power over you weakens. The only way to win this game is to stop playing it. Grooming. Grooming is a dangerous and calculated form of psychological manipulation where a person slowly builds trust and emotional dependence with the victim to gain control over them. It is often used in abusive relationships, toxic friendships, workplace exploitation, and predatory behavior. The process is gradual, making it difficult for the victim to recognize they are being manipulated until they are already deeply entangled. The grooming process follows a predictable pattern. It begins with excessive kindness and attention, making the victim feel special, understood, and deeply valued. The manipulator showers them with praise, gifts, or emotional support, creating an intense sense of closeness. This initial stage is designed to lower the victim's defenses, making them trust the manipulator completely. Once trust is established, the manipulator begins testing boundaries. They might introduce subtle discomforts, suggesting small favors, pushing minor requests, or making light criticisms just to see how the victim reacts. If the victim complies or does not resist, the manipulator escalates, slowly increasing their level of control. This could involve pressuring them into unhealthy situations, isolating them from friends and family, or making them feel indebted. In romantic relationships, grooming often follows a love-bombing phase, where the manipulator overwhelms their target with affection and promises of a perfect future. But once the victim is emotionally attached, the love-bombing fades, replaced by subtle control and coercion. The manipulator may make the victim feel guilty for setting boundaries, convince them that they are lucky to be in the relationship, or subtly chip away at their confidence to make them dependent. In friendships, grooming can take the form of manipulative loyalty tests. A toxic friend might start with overwhelming kindness, offering emotional support or favors. Over time, they begin making unreasonable demands, testing how far the victim will go to prove their friendship. If the victim resists, they may be guilt-tripped with statements like, "After everything I've done for you, you can't do this one thing for me." The slow erosion of boundaries leaves the victim feeling obligated and trapped. In workplaces, grooming is used by exploitative bosses or colleagues to secure obedience. A manipulative boss might single out an employee, giving them extra attention, small rewards, or preferential treatment. But once the employee trusts them, they start demanding unreasonable workloads, unpaid overtime, or personal favors. Because the manipulation was slow and strategic, the employee may feel guilty refusing, fearing they will lose the special treatment they were given. In family dynamics, grooming is often used by controlling parents or relatives. A toxic parent may spoil a child with love and attention, only to later use that closeness as leverage. They may say things like, "You're my favorite child. I know you wouldn't disappoint me," as a way to pressure them into compliance. The victim, desperate to maintain their parents' affection, learns to prioritize their parents' needs over their own well-being. The most dangerous aspect of grooming is that it feels like love at first. The victim does not realize they are being conditioned into dependency because the manipulator disguises control as care. They are made to feel special, chosen, and deeply valued until they are too entangled to leave easily. By the time they recognize the manipulation, they often feel trapped by guilt, obligation, or fear of losing the relationship. Breaking free from grooming requires understanding that real love, friendship, or mentorship does not come with control. If someone makes you feel obligated, indebted, or guilty for asserting your boundaries, they do not truly care about your well-being. The best defense against grooming is to trust your instincts. If something feels off, even if the person seems caring, take a step back and observe their long-term patterns. A manipulator will always escalate their control once they feel they have gained your trust. Real love and support do not require submission. The most important realization is that someone who truly cares about you will never make you feel trapped. If a relationship started with overwhelming kindness but has slowly turned into pressure, guilt, or control, that kindness was never real. It was a calculated trap. Recognizing this manipulation is the first step to reclaiming your independence. The strongest response is to walk away before the chains of obligation tighten any further. Creating rivalries. Creating rivalries is a manipulation tactic where a person deliberately stirs up competition, jealousy, or division between others to maintain control and power over them. The goal is to keep people distracted, insecure, or in conflict with each other so they never unite against the manipulator. This tactic is often used in toxic workplaces, dysfunctional families, manipulative friendships, and abusive relationships where the manipulator benefits from chaos, mistrust, and instability. It often starts subtly. The manipulator may plant seeds of doubt by making small, suggestive comments that create tension. In a workplace, a boss might say to one employee, "You're my top performer. I just wish everyone worked as hard as you," while telling another employee, "You're the only one I can really count on." These statements make each person feel both special and insecure, as they begin to wonder if others are trying to outshine them. Instead of working together, employees compete for the boss's approval, unaware they are being played against each other. In relationships, a manipulative partner may stir jealousy between their significant other and a friend, ex, or colleague. They might say things like, "You're great, but my ex used to do this one thing I really loved," or "I was talking to Sarah earlier, she really understands me." These comparisons create insecurity, making the victim feel they need to compete for the manipulator's attention, even though the competition itself is artificial. In families, toxic parents often create sibling rivalries to maintain control over their children. They might compare one sibling to another, saying, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" or show favoritism in subtle ways that make the children resent each other rather than question the parents' manipulative behavior. By keeping their children in constant competition, they ensure that no one ever challenges their authority. Friendships can also be poisoned by this tactic. A manipulative friend may spread gossip, selectively share information, or create misunderstandings to make people distrust each other. They might tell one friend, "I don't think Emily really likes you. She was saying some weird things about you," while telling Emily, "I don't think Sarah is as close to you as you think." This creates a rift where both friends start doubting each other, making the manipulator the only person each of them feels they can trust. The impact of creating rivalries is isolation, mistrust, and emotional exhaustion. The victims spend so much time trying to prove themselves, compete, or win favor that they fail to recognize they are being controlled. They begin seeing others as threats rather than allies, which makes them easier for the manipulator to exploit. The only way to break free from this trap is to step back and recognize the pattern. If someone is constantly comparing you to others, making you feel like you need to prove yourself, or creating tension where there was none before, they are manipulating you. The best response is to stop playing the game. Instead of competing for approval, recognize that the rivalries are artificially created. Open communication with others can expose the manipulator's tactics. Once people unite, the manipulator loses power. The strongest defense is choosing collaboration over competition. Real relationships, whether professional, romantic, or personal, should make you feel secure, not constantly compared. Anyone who deliberately creates rivalry is not trying to bring out your best. They are trying to keep you in a state of insecurity. The moment you refuse to participate, their control crumbles. Weaponizing kindness. Weaponizing kindness is one of the most deceptive forms of manipulation, where someone uses generosity, favors, or affection not as acts of goodwill, but as tools of control. Instead of being genuinely kind, the manipulator strategically gives support, gifts, or emotional warmth in a way that makes the recipient feel obligated, indebted, or guilty. The goal is not to help, but to create a sense of dependency or forced loyalty. This tactic often starts with excessive generosity. A manipulator might shower someone with unexpected gifts, go out of their way to offer favors, or provide emotional support when it seems least expected. At first, it feels wonderful. The victim believes they have found someone who truly cares about them, but over time, the kindness comes with invisible strings attached. The manipulator begins expecting something in return, even if their generosity was never asked for. In relationships, a partner might lavish their significant other with gifts, trips, or constant attention, making them feel incredibly valued. But later, they start saying things like, "After everything I've done for you, you can't even do this one thing for me." Suddenly, the kindness becomes a weapon, making the victim feel guilty for setting boundaries or saying no. The underlying message is, "You owe me." In friendships, weaponized kindness looks like doing excessive favors and then holding them over the victim's head. A manipulative friend might say, "I've always been there for you, and you can't even do this for me," or, "I guess I know where we stand." Their past acts of kindness are no longer about genuine friendship. They are leveraged to control behavior. At work, manipulative bosses use this tactic to keep employees overworked and underappreciated. They may act as though they are doing a favor by keeping someone on staff, giving them flexibility, or offering special opportunities. Later, they weaponize these favors by saying, "I went out of my way to help you. Are you really going to leave now?" Or, "I stuck my neck out for you, and this is how you repay me?" The employee, feeling guilty, stays in an unfair situation out of a false sense of obligation. Toxic family members also weaponize past sacrifices to control children or relatives. A parent might say, "I raised you, gave you everything, and now you're just going to abandon me?" Or, "I did so much for you growing up, and you can't even visit." The love and care that should have been freely given is now a form of guilt-based manipulation, ensuring the child remains trapped in an unhealthy dynamic. One of the most dangerous aspects of weaponized kindness is that it makes the victim feel guilty for resisting control. Because the manipulator's actions look like kindness, the victim struggles to recognize the manipulation. They tell themselves, "Maybe I really do owe them," or, "I'd feel like a bad person if I said no." This is exactly what the manipulator wants, to keep the victim stuck, unable to assert their own needs for fear of seeming ungrateful. The way to break free from weaponized kindness is to recognize the difference between genuine generosity and manipulation. Real kindness is given without expectation. It does not demand obedience, loyalty, or repayment. If someone consistently brings up their past favors, makes you feel guilty for setting boundaries, or acts as if their kindness entitles them to control your choices, they are not being kind. They are being manipulative. The best response to weaponized kindness is firm boundaries and emotional detachment. If someone guilt trips you over past favors, remind yourself, "I never asked for that. I do not owe them my freedom." A simple but powerful response is, "I appreciate what you did, but I am not obligated to do something that makes me uncomfortable." If their kindness was genuine, they will respect that. If they react with anger, guilt, or passive aggression, it was never about kindness. It was always about control. True generosity comes from love, not leverage. The moment you recognize when kindness is being used as a weapon, you stop feeling guilty for protecting your own well-being. The people who truly care about you will never make you feel like you owe them for their kindness. Real love and support do not come with conditions, and they never should. Sudden withdrawals. Sudden withdrawals are a powerful form of psychological manipulation where a person abruptly removes their presence, attention, or emotional warmth from someone without explanation. This tactic is designed to create emotional distress, confusion, and insecurity in the victim, making them desperate to regain the manipulator's approval. The unpredictability of these withdrawals makes them especially effective, as the victim never knows when the next one will happen or how long it will last. At first, the manipulator is warm, engaging, and affectionate. They may initiate deep conversations, offer unwavering support, or make the victim feel truly valued. Then, without warning, they become distant, ignoring calls, giving one-word answers, or acting cold and detached. The victim, confused by the sudden change, begins questioning themselves. Did I do something wrong? Did I upset them? How do I fix this? The manipulator offers no clear explanation, leaving the victim in a state of emotional turmoil. In romantic relationships, sudden withdrawals are often used to create emotional dependency. A manipulative partner may be attentive, affectionate, and loving for weeks, making their significant other feel deeply secure. Then, out of nowhere, they go cold, barely responding to messages, avoiding eye contact, or acting indifferent. When the victim tries to address it, the manipulator deflects with, "I just need some space," or "You're imagining things." This leaves the victim feeling powerless and insecure, desperate to get back to the warm, loving version of their partner. In friendships, sudden withdrawals can be used to establish dominance. A toxic friend may regularly engage in deep conversations, act like a confidant, and make the victim feel special. But if the victim does something the manipulator disapproves of, such as setting a boundary or spending time with someone else, they suddenly withdraw. They ignore messages, cancel plans, or act disinterested, forcing the victim to chase their approval in order to restore the friendship. In the workplace, bosses or colleagues use this tactic to create anxiety and insecurity. A manipulative boss might praise an employee one day, making them feel valued and competent, only to become distant and dismissive the next. This unpredictability keeps the employee on edge, constantly working harder to regain favor, afraid that they are on the verge of losing their job. Family members can also use sudden withdrawals as a means of emotional control. A toxic parent may be nurturing and supportive one moment, then suddenly cold and disinterested. If a child questions this change, they might hear, "I'm just disappointed in you," without any further explanation. This forces the child to seek validation and approval, making them easier to control. The psychological effects of sudden withdrawals are profound. The victim develops anxious attachment, constantly seeking reassurance and adjusting their behavior to avoid triggering another withdrawal. They begin walking on eggshells, unsure of what will cause the next disappearance. Over time, this emotional unpredictability erodes self-esteem, making the victim more dependent on the manipulator's affection. The best way to break free from this manipulation is to stop chasing after the person who withdrew. If someone suddenly pulls away without explanation, recognize that this is a deliberate tactic, not a reflection of your worth. Instead of seeking their approval, shift your focus to your own self-respect. A simple but effective mindset shift is, if someone values me, they will communicate, not disappear. The moment you stop reacting to sudden withdrawals, the manipulator loses their power over you. Feigning outrage. Feigning outrage is a manipulation tactic where a person pretends to be deeply offended, hurt, or angry in order to shut down conversation, deflect accountability, or pressure someone into compliance. This over-the-top reaction is designed to intimidate, confuse, or guilt-trip the victim into backing down, making them feel as though they are the unreasonable one. This tactic is especially effective because it turns the tables on the victim. Instead of addressing the real issue, the conversation suddenly becomes about the manipulator's exaggerated emotional response. The victim, now feeling guilty for supposedly causing this distress, often abandons their original concern and shifts into damage control mode, apologizing, softening their stance, or trying to make things right. In relationships, feigning outrage is often used to avoid accountability. If one partner confronts the other about something reasonable, such as a broken promise or hurtful behavior, the manipulator explodes with, "I can't believe you'd accuse me of that. After everything I've done for you." Instead of discussing the real issue, the victim is now on the defensive, apologizing and trying to calm their partner down. This ensures that the manipulator never has to take responsibility. In friendships, a toxic friend might feign outrage to dodge criticism or control others. If confronted about gossiping, they might dramatically say, "Wow, I never thought you'd think so little of me." Instead of admitting to their behavior, they make the victim feel bad for even bringing it up. This shifts the blame, forcing the victim to apologize rather than expect accountability. At work, feigned outrage can be used to manipulate perception and control narratives. A boss who is confronted about unfair treatment might respond with, "How dare you question my leadership? I have done so much for this company." By reacting with exaggerated offense, they silence dissent and discourage further pushback. Similarly, a coworker who is caught slacking might explode with, "I work harder than anyone here. You have no idea what I go through." This sudden intensity makes others hesitant to press the issue, effectively shutting down criticism. In families, feigning outrage is often used by narcissistic or controlling parents to avoid discussions about their behavior. If an adult child tries to set boundaries, a toxic parent might react with, "I can't believe my own child would treat me this way, after everything I sacrificed for you." This emotional explosion is not genuine hurt. It is a control mechanism designed to make the child feel guilty and abandon their boundaries. Socially, this tactic is often used in arguments or debates to manipulate public perception. If someone points out a flaw or contradiction in a manipulator's argument, they might respond with, "How dare you attack me like this?" Or, "This is an outrage. I refuse to continue this conversation." Instead of defending their position logically, they use their feigned indignation as a weapon, making it seem like the other person is out of line simply for questioning them. The psychological impact of feigned outrage is that it creates self-doubt in the victim. They start second-guessing themselves, thinking, "Did I really overstep? Was I too harsh? Maybe I should let this go." Over time, this makes them more hesitant to stand up for themselves, giving the manipulator even more control. The best way to counter feigned outrage is to stay calm and refuse to engage in their emotional theatrics. If someone explodes in exaggerated anger or distress when confronted, recognize it for what it is, a distraction and a guilt trip. Instead of apologizing or backing down, hold your ground with a simple, unshaken response. "I understand that you're upset, but that doesn't change the issue at hand." Or, if they try to end the conversation through their dramatic reaction, "We can talk when you're ready to discuss this rationally." Feigning outrage is not about genuine feelings. It is about shutting down opposition. Once you stop reacting emotionally to their staged performance, the tactic loses its effectiveness. The most powerful response is not to be intimidated, not to be guilt-tripped, and not to let someone's exaggerated emotions distract you from the truth. Martyr complex. The martyr complex is a manipulative tactic where a person portrays themselves as a long-suffering, self-sacrificing victim in order to gain sympathy, control others, or avoid accountability. They deliberately take on excessive burdens, often unasked, and then complain about how much they do for everyone else while receiving little in return. This creates guilt and obligation in those around them, making it difficult to set boundaries, criticize them, or refuse their demands. At first, The martyr appears selfless, hardworking, and devoted. They might insist on handling tasks alone, always offering to help even when it's unnecessary. But instead of doing these things out of genuine kindness, they weaponize their sacrifices by constantly reminding others of their efforts. They might say things like, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me," or "I always put everyone else first, and no one appreciates me." Their suffering is not a result of selflessness, it is a tool for emotional leverage. In romantic relationships, the martyr complex is often used to control a partner through guilt. A manipulative partner may take on extra responsibilities, not out of love, but so they can later throw it in their partner's face. They might say, "I do everything for you, and you don't even care," or "I sacrifice so much to be with you, and you can't even do this one thing for me." Their so-called generosity comes with invisible strings attached, making the victim feel obligated to meet their endless demands. In families, martyrdom is commonly seen in controlling parents who use their sacrifices as a way to guilt-trip their children into obedience. A toxic mother or father might say, "I gave up my whole life for you, and you're just going to walk away," or "You wouldn't even be here if it weren't for me, and you treat me like this." This manipulation is meant to keep the child indebted, making it difficult for them to set boundaries or pursue independence without overwhelming guilt. In friendships, the martyr complex appears when someone goes out of their way to do favors, then later resents and punishes others for not repaying them in the exact way they expect. They might say, "I always drop everything for you, but you never do the same for me," even when the favors were unsolicited. Instead of communicating their needs openly, they suffer in silence and then explode with resentment, making the victim feel like they are selfish or ungrateful. In workplaces, martyrdom is used to create an illusion of superiority. A toxic coworker might take on excessive work, refuse help, and then complain endlessly about how overworked they are. They may say things like, "No one works as hard as I do," or "If I don't do it, no one will." By making themselves look like the hardest worker, they guilt others into working harder, while secretly enjoying the feeling of superiority and control. The psychological effects of dealing with a martyr are exhaustion, guilt, and frustration. The victim feels like they are constantly trying to repay a debt that never goes away. Even when they express gratitude, the martyr finds new ways to portray themselves as unappreciated, ensuring that the guilt never disappears. The best way to counter this manipulation is to refuse to play into their guilt traps. Instead of defending yourself or trying to prove your appreciation, set firm boundaries. If they say, "I do everything for you, and you don't even care," respond with, "I appreciate what you've done, but I never asked you to sacrifice yourself for me." If they try to guilt you, remind yourself, real generosity does not come with an emotional bill. The moment you stop letting their suffering control your emotions, their manipulation loses its power. Conditional love. Conditional love is one of the most damaging and controlling manipulation tactics, where affection, support, or approval is only given when the victim meets specific conditions set by the manipulator. Unlike genuine love, which is consistent and unconditional, conditional love teaches the victim that they must earn love through obedience, perfection, or self-sacrifice. This creates deep insecurity, making the victim desperate for approval while constantly afraid of losing it. The manipulator uses love as a weapon, rewarding the victim when they behave as expected and withdrawing affection when they do not. The victim is conditioned to prioritize pleasing the manipulator above their own needs, fearing that any mistake or disagreement could lead to rejection. In romantic relationships, conditional love is often used by emotionally abusive partners. A manipulative partner might shower their significant other with affection when they are compliant, but become cold, dismissive, or cruel when they express independence or question the relationship. They may say things like, "I loved you more when you were more supportive," or, "If you really loved me, you would do this for me." These statements create an unstable emotional environment where the victim feels like they must constantly prove their worth to avoid being abandoned. In family dynamics, conditional love is frequently used by toxic parents. A parent might show affection and pride only when their child meets their expectations, such as excelling in school, choosing a specific career, or behaving in a way that aligns with their beliefs. The moment the child makes an independent decision, the love disappears, replaced by disappointment, criticism, or even silent treatment. A parent might say, "I can't believe you would do this after everything I've done for you," or, "You're not the child I raised." This manipulation forces the child into a life of seeking approval, often at the cost of their own happiness. In friendships, conditional love takes the form of one-sided loyalty and expectations. A manipulative friend may be supportive when the victim agrees with them, but withdraw that support if they make a different choice. They might say, "I just don't know if I can trust you anymore," after the victim sets a boundary or makes a decision for themselves. The underlying message is, "You only get my friendship if you do what I want." In workplaces, conditional approval is used by manipulative bosses to control employees. A boss may act supportive and encouraging when an employee overworks themselves but becomes dismissive or critical if they request time off, set boundaries, or question unfair treatment. They might say, "I thought you were dedicated, but maybe I was wrong," implying that respect and recognition are not freely given but must be constantly earned. The psychological effects of conditional love are devastating. The victim often feels unworthy, anxious, and desperate for validation. They learn that love is not something they deserve, but something they must earn through self-sacrifice. Over time, they may become people pleasers, afraid to express their own needs for fear of being abandoned. The best way to break free from conditional love is to realize that real love does not come with terms and conditions. If someone only shows love or approval when you behave a certain way, they do not love you. They love controlling you. The strongest response is to reject the idea that you must perform for love. When a manipulator says, "I don't know if I can love you if you do this," respond with, "Then that's not real love." Unconditional love does not disappear when mistakes are made, when opinions differ, or when independence is asserted. Anyone who makes you feel like love is something you must earn does not truly love you. They are using you. The moment you stop fearing their rejection, their control disappears. Planned chaos. Planned chaos is a manipulation tactic where a person intentionally creates confusion, disorder, or emotional instability to keep others distracted, overwhelmed, or dependent on them. The goal is to control people through uncertainty, ensuring they are too preoccupied with reacting to the chaos to ever question, resist, or recognize the manipulator's true intentions. This tactic is used in toxic relationships, dysfunctional workplaces, manipulative friendships, and controlling family dynamics, where unpredictability is a tool of power. Unlike natural chaos, which happens by accident, planned chaos is deliberate. The manipulator stirs up conflict, miscommunication, or crises, and then either steps in as the hero to solve the problem, or sits back and watches as everyone scrambles to fix the mess they created. The victims, caught in a cycle of reacting rather than thinking critically, remain disoriented and emotionally drained, making them easier to manipulate. This tactic often begins with constant contradictions and mixed signals. A manipulative person may give one set of expectations one day and an entirely different set the next, making the victim feel like they are always failing. A toxic boss, for example, may praise an employee for being independent one week, but criticize them for not being a team player the next. The unpredictability keeps the employee second-guessing themselves, unable to trust their own instincts. In romantic relationships, planned chaos is used to create emotional instability and dependency. A manipulative partner may swing between love and cruelty, saying things like, "I can't live without you," one day, and "maybe we should take a break," the next. They might manufacture unnecessary fights over small things, keep their partner guessing about their feelings, or constantly change their stance on what they want. This emotional roller coaster leaves the victim desperate for stability, causing them to cling to the manipulator for reassurance, the very person who is causing the instability. In families, planned chaos is often used by narcissistic or controlling parents. A parent may pit siblings against each other, create family drama out of nothing, or play favorites in unpredictable ways. They may repeatedly change the rules of what is acceptable, making their children feel like they are always walking on eggshells. If the victim questions the inconsistency, the manipulator might deny it, saying, "I never said that," or "You're making things up." This keeps the victim in a perpetual state of self-doubt and guilt, unable to ever fully break free. In workplaces, manipulative leaders use planned chaos to exert control and prevent resistance. A toxic boss might constantly change company policies, shift deadlines unexpectedly, or create unnecessary problems that employees must scramble to fix. They may foster divisions between team members, ensuring that no one fully trusts each other. By keeping employees too overwhelmed to think critically, the boss prevents them from recognizing the deeper dysfunction or pushing back against unfair treatment. In friendships, planned chaos is used to maintain control and social dominance. A toxic friend may stir up drama between others, spread conflicting stories, or create situations where people are forced to pick sides. They may intentionally flake on plans, ignore messages for days, or make their availability unpredictable, leaving their friends feeling insecure about where they stand. This ensures that the victim remains emotionally dependent, always trying to stay in the manipulator's good graces. The psychological effects of planned chaos are mental exhaustion, anxiety, and learned helplessness. The victims become so used to instability that they stop expecting clarity or fairness, accepting the manipulator's unpredictable behavior as normal. Over time, they may lose trust in their own judgment, believing that they are the ones who are being too sensitive, too demanding, or too difficult. Breaking free from planned chaos requires recognizing the pattern and refusing to engage. Instead of reacting to every sudden shift, step back and ask, "Is this an actual crisis, or is this being deliberately manufactured?" Refuse to play into the panic, emotional storms, or constant uncertainty that the manipulator creates. If a partner suddenly threatens to leave instead of begging them to stay, say, "If that's what you want, I respect your choice." If a boss constantly changes expectations, document everything and stick to clear, consistent work habits instead of scrambling to meet their latest demands. If a family member thrives on drama, disengage from unnecessary conflicts and set boundaries. The most powerful response to planned chaos is remaining calm and detached. Manipulators thrive on emotional reactions. When you stop giving them that, their control weakens. Chaos is only effective if people feel forced to respond to it. The moment you stop participating, their ability to destabilize you disappears.